The ultrasound screen flickered with the steady heartbeat of her unborn son. When Nora Whitmore heard the voice she thought she'd never hear again, the one that belonged to the father she'd spent 6 months hiding from. Lucien Moretti stood in the doorway of the Providence Clinic, his dark eyes fixed on her swollen belly, and in that instant, every carefully constructed lie shattered. The most dangerous man she'd ever loved had found her, and the secret she'd been protecting was written across her body in a way no false name could hide. If you're drawn to stories of second chances born from impossible choices, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The Providence Women's Health Clinic smelled like antiseptic and lavender air freshener, a combination that had become oddly comforting to Nora Whitmore over the past 3 months. She lay on the examination table, her shirt pulled up to expose the round swell of her belly, while the ultrasound technician moved the wand across her skin with practiced efficiency. The monitor showed grainy black and white images that somehow resolved into the profile of a tiny face, a spine curved like a question mark, hands no bigger than flower petals. "There's the heartbeat," the technician said, her voice warm with the kind of professional enthusiasm that suggested she never tired of this moment. "Strong and steady at 142. Nora smiled, though her eyes stung with unexpected tears. 6 months ago, she wouldn't have believed she could feel this way, protective, hopeful, almost peaceful. 6 months ago, she'd been someone else entirely, living a different life in a different city, tangled up with a man whose darkness she'd been too blind to see until it was almost too late. "Everything looks perfect," the technician continued, pointing to various features on the screen. "Baby's measuring right on track for 28 weeks. Good fluid levels, placenta looks great." "You're doing an excellent job, Mama." The tears came then, silent and sudden. Nora wiped them away quickly, embarrassed by the surge of emotion. She'd been Julie Brennan for 6 months now, a quiet woman who worked the early shift at a bookstore on Benefit Street, who lived in a modest apartment near the Brown University campus, who attended prenatal yoga classes and smiled politely at neighbors without ever letting them get too close. Julie Brennan had no past, no complications, no secrets worth discovering. But underneath that carefully constructed identity, Nora Whitmore still existed, still remembered, still feared, still ran from ghosts that refused to stay buried. "Would you like some pictures?" the technician asked, already reaching for the printer. "Yes, please." The machine whirred, spitting out grainy images that Nora knew she would treasure despite their poor quality. She'd started a small album in her apartment, hidden in the back of her closet behind winter clothes she'd probably never need in Providence's mild climate. Pictures of the first ultrasound at 12 weeks, when the baby had been nothing more than a peanut-shaped blur. Pictures from 16 weeks, when she'd first been able to make out tiny hands and feet. Pictures from 20 weeks, when she'd learned she was having a boy and had to leave the clinic quickly before the technician saw her cry. A boy. A son. A tiny life that depended entirely on her ability to keep running, keep hiding, keep pretending that the past couldn't catch up if she just moved fast enough. The technician handed her a paper towel to wipe the gel from her stomach. "You can get dressed. Dr. Patterson will be in shortly to go over everything with you." "Thank you." Alone in the exam room, Nora pulled her shirt down and sat up slowly, her hand resting on the curve of her belly. The baby kicked, a flutter against her palm that still felt miraculous despite its frequency. She'd read that babies could hear voices now, could recognize their mother's heartbeat, could dream in the dark warmth of the womb. What did this little boy dream about? What kind of life did he imagine waiting for him on the other side of birth? Nora hoped he dreamed of safety, of ordinary things like playgrounds and birthday parties and bedtime stories, of a mother who loved him enough to give up everything she'd ever known to protect him, of a future uncomplicated by violence, power, and the kind of darkness that swallowed people whole. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Dr. Patterson's cheerful face. The door opened, and Lucien Moretti walked into the room. For a moment, Nora's brain refused to process what her eyes were seeing. It couldn't be real, couldn't be him. Not here, not now, not after 6 months of running and hiding and praying she'd covered her tracks well enough. But there was no mistaking that face, those eyes, the way he moved with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no, never being denied anything he wanted. He wore a dark suit that probably cost more than 3 months of her rent. His black hair slightly longer than she remembered. His jaw tight with an emotion she couldn't quite name. He looked older somehow, harder around the edges, as if the months since she'd seen him had carved away something essential and left only sharp angles in its wake. Their eyes met. The world stopped. "Hello, Nora." His voice was exactly as she remembered. Smooth, controlled, with an underlying current of steel that suggested he never asked for anything he wasn't prepared to take by force. Hearing her real name spoken aloud after months of answering to Julie felt like a slap, like waking from a dream only to find the nightmare waiting on the other side. "Get out!" Her voice came out steadier than she felt, though her hands were shaking. "Get out right now." Lucian's gaze dropped to her belly, and something flickered across his face. Shock, rage, pain, all compressed into a single heartbeat before his expression went carefully blank. When he looked at her again, his dark eyes were cold enough to freeze blood. "How far along are you?" "That's none of your business." "How far along?" The deadly quiet of his tone made her stomach clench. This was the voice he used when issuing orders he expected to be obeyed without question. The voice that preceded violence like thunder before lightning. She'd heard it before, directed at men who'd made the mistake of crossing him, and had told herself that he would never use it on her. She'd been wrong about so many things. 28 weeks, she said, because lying seemed pointless now. "I'm due in January." She watched him do the math, watched the moment he arrived at the inevitable conclusion. His hands curled into fists at his sides, and for a terrible second she thought he might put them through the wall. But Lucien Moretti hadn't built an empire by losing control of his emotions, no matter how much fury burned beneath the surface. "It's mine." Not a question. A statement of fact delivered with the absolute certainty of a man who knew exactly when he'd last touched her, last held her, last whispered promises in the dark that had turned to ash in the morning light. Nora said nothing. Her silence was answer enough. "You've been hiding from me for 6 months. His voice was dangerously soft now, the kind of quiet that preceded explosions. "Carrying my child, and you didn't think I had a right to know." "Rights?" The word came out sharp as broken glass. "You want to talk about rights? You lost any claim to rights the moment I found out what you really are." "What I am," Lucien repeated slowly, "is the father of your baby. What you are is a criminal, a killer, a man who built his fortune on blood and terror." She was standing now, though she didn't remember getting off the examination table. "I saw the files, Lucien. I know what you've done, what you're still doing, and I will not let my son grow up in that world." Something cracked in his carefully controlled expression. "Our son." "No. My son. Mine. I'm the one who's been throwing up every morning. I'm the one whose body is changing every day. I'm the one who lies awake at night wondering if I'm strong enough to do this alone." Her voice broke, and she hated herself for the weakness. You don't get to walk in here after 6 months and claim ownership of something you didn't even know existed. "I didn't know because you ran away like a thief in the night." The words exploded out of him, making her flinch despite herself. "I woke up and you were gone. No note, no explanation, no trace. Do you have any idea what I thought, what I feared? That you'd lost control of your property?" The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. "That one of your possessions had escaped?" His jaw worked, muscles jumping beneath the skin. "You were never a possession to me." "Then what was I, Lucien, your girlfriend, your lover, the woman you kept in a beautiful apartment and showered with gifts while you built your empire on other people's suffering?" She laughed, the sound harsh and broken. "I was willfully blind, and I hate myself for it. But I won't make that mistake twice, and I won't let my son pay for my stupidity. He's not just yours to protect." Lucienne took a step closer, and she forced herself not to retreat. "He's mine too. My blood, my legacy, my—" He stopped, seemed to be fighting for control. "You had no right to keep this from me." "I had every right." Her hand moved protectively to her belly, and she saw his eyes track the gesture. "The night I left, I found your files. I saw the photos of what happens to people who cross you. I saw the reports about the territories you control, the money you launder, the violence you order, like other men order coffee. She swallowed hard against the nausea rising in her throat. Morning sickness had mostly passed, but fear could still make her stomach turn. And I realized that the man I loved never existed. You were just a role you played, and I was too stupid to see the truth. You don't know anything about the truth. His voice had gone cold again, distant. You saw files taken out of context by people trying to destroy me. Is that what you tell yourself? That you're the victim here? She shook her head, suddenly exhausted. I don't care anymore, Lucien. I don't care about your justifications or your rationalizations. All I care about is making sure my son has a chance at a normal life, and that means keeping him as far away from you as possible. The words hung between them like a death sentence. She watched Lucien absorb them, watched something in his expression shift from fury to something darker and more complex, pain perhaps, or a kind of desperate calculation that sent chills down her spine. You think I'll let you do that? He asked quietly. You think I'll just walk away and pretend my son doesn't exist? I think you don't have a choice. Everyone has choices, Nora. He moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Expensive, familiar, a ghost of better times. And you're about to find out what happens when you make the wrong ones. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Are you threatening me? I'm stating facts. His eyes held hers, dark and unreadable. You're carrying my son. That makes you mine, whether you like it or not. And what's mine, I protect. I don't need your protection. Then you're even more naive than I thought. He glanced around the small exam room with obvious disdain. You're hiding in Providence under a fake name, working minimum wage jobs, living in some apartment that probably has locks a child could pick. You think that's safety? You think your little disguise is enough to keep you hidden from people who actually want to find you? Ice flooded her veins. What people? Use your imagination. He straightened his cuffs with the kind of casual precision that somehow made the gesture threatening. I'm not the only one who knows what you look like, Nora. I'm not the only one who might have an interest in finding you. The only reason you've stayed hidden this long is because I didn't want you found. You're lying. Am I? He tilted his head, studying her with the focus of a predator assessing prey. You think I couldn't have tracked you down in a week if I'd really wanted to? You used your real social security number to rent your apartment. Did you really think that wouldn't show up in the right databases? You kept your phone for 3 days before switching to a burner. That's 3 days of location data. You withdrew cash from your bank account in Hartford on your way here. Security footage, timestamps, direction of travel. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I knew where you were by the end of the first month. I've known for 5 months that you were alive, safe, and apparently determined to erase me from your life. The room spun. Then why didn't you? Because I was angry. The admission seemed to cost him something. Angry enough to let you think you'd gotten away. Angry enough to tell myself that if you wanted to disappear so badly, I should let you. His expression hardened. But that was before I knew about my son. He's not... Don't. The single word cracked like a whip. Don't tell me again that he's not mine. Don't insult both of us with that lie. He took a breath, visibly fighting for composure. 28 weeks. You said you're 28 weeks along. That means you got pregnant in April, probably early April, based on the timing. And we both know you weren't seeing anyone else, Nora. You were mine then, completely, and this baby is the proof. She wanted to argue, wanted to find some way to deny the fundamental truth of what he was saying, but the dates didn't lie, and neither did the flutter of movement beneath her hand, a child who existed because she'd loved the wrong man, trusted the wrong promises, believed in a future that had never been real. What do you want? She asked finally, too tired to keep fighting. What do I want? Lucien laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. I want to turn back time. I want to wake up 6 months ago and find you still in my bed, still trusting me, still looking at me like I was something other than a monster. But since I can't have that, I'll settle for making sure my son is born safe, healthy, and into a life where he knows who his father is. No, it's not a negotiation. Everything is a negotiation. She forced steel into her spine, into her voice. You want access to your son? Fine. We can arrange visitation after he's born, supervised in public places with strict conditions about what he can and cannot be exposed to. Supervised visitation. He said it like the words tasted foul. You want to treat me like some kind of dangerous criminal who can't be trusted alone with his own child. You are a dangerous criminal. And you're a woman alone, pregnant, vulnerable, playing at being invisible in a city that would forget you existed if you disappeared tomorrow. He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. You want to know what I want, Nora? I want you to stop being stupid. I want you to stop pretending that running away solved anything. And I want you to understand that whether you like it or not, we're connected now, through this baby, through everything that happened between us, through the simple fact that I will not let my son grow up believing his father abandoned him. Better he thinks you abandoned him than know what you really are. The words hit like a physical blow. She saw Lucien flinch, saw something flash through his eyes that looked almost like genuine pain before his expression shuttered closed again. You don't get to make that choice for him, he said quietly. I'm his mother. Making choices for him is literally my job. And I'm his father. That gives me rights too, whether you want to acknowledge them or not. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then slipped it back into his pocket. We're going to have this conversation somewhere private, somewhere we won't be interrupted. I'm not going anywhere with you. Yes, you are. Because in about 2 minutes, 3 of my men are going to walk through that door, and you're going to have a choice. Come willingly and have a civilized discussion, or be carried out of here like cargo. Your decision. Her blood went cold. You wouldn't dare. Try me. She believed him. That was the worst part. Looking into those dark eyes and knowing with absolute certainty that Lucien Moretti would do exactly what he threatened without hesitation or remorse. He'd built an empire on the willingness to do what others wouldn't, to cross lines that normal people considered sacred. Kidnapping the mother of his child from a medical clinic wouldn't even register as a moral dilemma. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from here, she said quickly, desperately. We can talk there. Public place, lots of witnesses, perfectly civilized. He considered this, then nodded slowly. Fine. But if you try to run, I know. She did. She knew exactly what would happen if she tried to run now, knew that the fragile illusion of freedom she'd constructed over the past 6 months had been just that. An illusion, a temporary reprieve that Lucien had allowed because it suited his purposes. I won't run. Smart girl. The condescension in his tone made her want to scream, but she swallowed it down along with the fear and the fury and the sick realization that everything was falling apart faster than she could process. Dr. Patterson would come looking for her eventually, would wonder where her patient had gone. The technician had her next appointment waiting. The normal machinery of normal life would continue without her, oblivious to the fact that Nora Whitmore's carefully constructed world was crumbling into dust. I need to get my things, she said. Lucien gestured toward the chair where she'd left her purse and jacket. Be my guest. She gathered her belongings with shaking hands, hyper-aware of his eyes following her every movement. The ultrasound pictures were still on the counter, those precious images of her son, evidence of the secret she'd tried so hard to keep. She reached for them automatically, but Lucien was faster. His hand closed over the printouts, and he studied them with an intensity that made her chest ache. She watched his expression change as he traced the outline of their baby's profile with one finger. Such a gentle gesture from hands she knew were capable of terrible violence. He looks like me, Lucien said softly. You can't possibly tell that from an ultrasound. I can tell. He looked up at her, and for just a moment the mask slipped enough for her to see the raw emotion underneath. Wonder, possessiveness, a fierce protectiveness that matched her own. He's mine, Nora. Mine. And nothing you do will change that. She wanted to argue, wanted to snatch the pictures away and run and keep running until she found someplace far enough away that even Lucien Moretti's power couldn't reach. But the baby kicked again, a reminder that running had never really been an option, not when she was carrying a part of him inside her, a connection that couldn't be severed by distance or denial. The coffee shop, she said quietly. 2 blocks west. I know the one. Of course he did. He probably knew every inch of this city, had probably been tracking her movements for months while she'd foolishly believed in her own invisibility. After you. The walk through the clinic felt surreal, like moving through a dream where everything looked normal, but nothing made sense. The waiting room was full of pregnant women and their partners, all of them focused on magazines or phones or quiet conversations about nursery colors and baby names. None of them looked up as Nora passed by with a strange man at her back. Why would they? To the casual observer, they were just another couple navigating the complicated terrain of impending parenthood. If only they knew. The autumn air hit her like a slap when she stepped outside, cold enough to make her pull her jacket tighter around her shoulders. Providence in October was beautiful, all golden leaves and crisp blue skies, the kind of weather that made her think of pumpkin patches and apple cider and all the normal things she'd never get to do with her son. Not if Lucien had his way. Not if the past caught up with the present and dragged them both back into the darkness. Which way? Lucien's voice was neutral, conversational, as if they were old friends meeting for coffee instead of two people whose lives had collided in the worst possible way. Nora pointed west and started walking. He fell into step beside her easily, his presence both familiar and alien after 6 months apart. She'd forgotten how tall he was, how his very existence seemed to command space and attention. People moved out of their way without seeming to realize they were doing it, some instinct warning them that this was not a man to casually obstruct. "You look healthy," he said after half a block of silence. "The pregnancy suits you." She didn't know how to respond to that, so she said nothing. "Are you eating enough? Taking vitamins? Seeing the doctor regularly?" "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." "Yes, Lucien, I'm taking care of myself and the baby. You don't need to worry." "I always worry." The admission came out rough, unpolished. "It's what I do." "You worry about assets and territories and who might be planning to betray you next. You don't worry about people." "You're not people." He caught her arm, gentle but firm, and she stopped walking despite herself. "You were never just people to me, Nora. You were—" He stopped, seemed to struggle for words. "You were everything." "Were," she repeated, past tense. "Because you chose to make it past tense." His grip tightened fractionally. "I never stopped, Nora. I never moved on, never looked elsewhere, never tried to replace you. For 6 months I told myself I hated you for leaving, that I was better off without you, that I should forget you ever existed. And then I walked into that clinic and saw you pregnant with my child, and I realized I'd been lying to myself the whole time." Her throat closed around words she couldn't speak. This was the Lucien she remembered from before, the one who could be devastatingly honest about his feelings, even while lying about everything else. The one who'd held her after making love and whispered promises he probably meant in the moment, before reality intruded and reminded him who he was, what he could never escape. "It doesn't matter," she managed finally. "What we felt or didn't feel for each other, it's irrelevant now. All that matters is the baby. Our baby deserves parents who aren't at war with each other. Our baby deserves to grow up safe. That's all I care about." "And you don't think I can keep him safe?" The question carried an edge of genuine hurt beneath the anger. "You think I'm incapable of protecting my own son?" "I think you live in a world where safety is an illusion and violence is currency. I think loving you would put a target on our son's back that would last his entire life." She pulled free of his grip and kept walking, needing movement to keep the panic at bay. "I know what happened to Vitelli's daughter, Lucienne. I know about the kidnapping, the ransom, the way they sent her back piece by piece until he paid. I know that's the world you exist in, and I won't subject my child to it." She heard his sharp intake of breath, felt the sudden tension radiating from him like heat. When he spoke again, his voice was deadly quiet. "How do you know about that?" "The files I found. The ones you kept in your office safe." She'd spent 3 sleepless nights reading those documents, learning exactly what kind of man she'd given her heart to. "You documented everything, every deal, every killing, every act of violence that built your empire. I don't know if it was arrogance or insurance, but you kept records of it all. Those files were encrypted. Your password was my birthday." The admission tasted like betrayal, even though she'd been the one betrayed. "It took me 10 minutes to figure out." The silence that followed was absolute. Nora risked a glance at Lucien and immediately wished she hadn't. His expression was carved from stone, beautiful and terrible in its fury. "You think you know me based on some files," he said finally, "based on records of business transactions taken completely out of context. Murder isn't a business transaction. Sometimes it is. No apology, no justification, just cold statement of fact. Sometimes violence is the only language certain people understand. Sometimes you have to do terrible things to prevent worse things from happening. And who decides what's worse? You? She stopped in front of the coffee shop, too agitated to go inside yet. You get to be judge, jury, and executioner because you've convinced yourself you're serving some greater good? I protect what's mine by killing anyone who threatens it, by doing whatever is necessary. He met her eyes without flinching. You want honesty, Nora? I'll give you honesty. Yes, I've killed people. Yes, I've ordered violence, orchestrated fear, built power through methods you find reprehensible, but I've never pretended to be anything other than what I am. You're the one who chose not to look too closely, who accepted the beautiful apartment and the expensive gifts and the comfortable life without asking too many questions about where it came from. The accusation hit home because it was true. She had been willfully blind, had chosen comfort over curiosity, had loved him without really knowing him because knowing meant confronting truths she wasn't ready to face. You're right, she said quietly. I was complicit in my own ignorance, but I'm not anymore, and I won't let my son pay for my mistakes. Our son, he corrected automatically. Then, softer. Can we please just talk? No more fighting, no more accusations, just talk. She looked at him, really looked, maybe for the first time since he'd walked into that exam room. He looked exhausted beneath the expensive suit and careful grooming, shadows under his eyes that suggested he'd been sleeping as poorly as she had. Whatever else he was, whatever darkness he carried, he was still the father of her child. That reality couldn't be denied or escaped. Fine, she said finally. We'll talk. The coffee shop was mercifully quiet. Just a handful of college students bent over laptops and a young mother with a sleeping infant in a carrier. Nora chose a table in the back corner as far from other customers as possible and sank into the chair with a gratitude that betrayed how much the confrontation had taken out of her. Lucien ordered for both of them without asking what she wanted. Herbal tea for her, black coffee for himself, exactly what they would have ordered 6 months ago when they'd been different people living different lives. The familiarity of it made her chest ache. Thank you, she said when he set the tea in front of her. He nodded and sat across from her, the small table feeling simultaneously too intimate and not enough barrier between them. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, two people trying to figure out how to navigate impossible terrain. When is he due? Lucien asked finally. January 15th, approximately. You're seeing a good doctor. The best I can afford on a bookstore salary. Something flickered in his expression. You're working retail? Someone has to pay the bills. I would have... He stopped, shook his head. Never mind. It doesn't matter now. You would have what? Supported me? Kept me in the style to which I'd become accustomed? The bitterness crept back into her voice despite her best efforts. I didn't want your money, Lucien. I wanted out. And now? Now I still want out. But apparently that's not an option anymore. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, and she noticed his knuckles were scarred. New marks she didn't recognize, evidence of violence she hadn't witnessed. How many people had he hurt in the 6 months since she left? How many had he killed? I'm not going to take him from you, Lucien said quietly. Despite what you think of me, I'm not a complete monster. I know he needs his mother. But I will be part of his life. Not supervised visits in public places like I'm some kind of dangerous stranger. Real involvement, diaper changes and midnight feedings, and all the ordinary chaos of raising a child. He leaned forward, intensity burning in his dark eyes. I want to be his father, Nora, not just biologically, but in every way that matters. In the middle of your empire? Surrounded by violence and criminals and constant danger? I'm getting out. The words hit like a thunderbolt. Nora stared at him, certain she'd misheard. What? I'm getting out. He said it again, clearer this time. I've been working on it for the past 3 months, divesting from illegal operations, converting assets to legitimate businesses, cutting ties with people and organizations that can't transition to legal enterprise. That's impossible. It's difficult, not impossible. He took a sip of coffee, and she realized his hands were shaking slightly, the only outward sign of how much this admission was costing him. I won't lie and say it's going well. There are people who don't want me to leave, who see my departure as weakness or betrayal. There are assets that can't be easily converted, relationships that have to be burned, debts that have to be paid in ways that don't involve currency. Why? She couldn't process what he was saying, couldn't reconcile it with everything she thought she knew. Why would you do that? Because I'm 38 years old, and I'm tired. The exhaustion in his voice was real, raw. Because I've been building this empire since I was 23, and somewhere along the way I forgot there might be other ways to live. Because you left. And for 6 months I told myself it didn't matter, that I was better off without you, that I could just keep going the way I always had. He set down his cup carefully, as if afraid he might break it. And then I saw you today, pregnant with my son, and I realized that I'd been given a chance most people in my position never get, a chance to be something other than what I've always been. Nora's hands trembled around her tea. You can't just walk away from an empire, Lucian. It doesn't work that way. No, he agreed. It doesn't. Which is why it's taking time, why it's dangerous, why there are nights I don't sleep because I'm trying to figure out how to dismantle everything I built without getting killed in the process. He reached across the table, and before she could pull away, his hand covered hers. But I'm doing it anyway. For him. For you. For the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I can be the kind of father a child deserves instead of the kind that gets him killed before his 10th birthday. She wanted to believe him. Every cell in her body wanted to believe that change was possible, that people could transform, that the man who'd built an empire on blood and fear could somehow become someone safe enough to trust with their son's future. But belief felt like just another form of blindness. Words are easy, she said softly. Prove it. His hand tightened on hers. How? I don't know yet, but if you really want to be part of his life, part of our lives, you're going to have to show me that you're serious about leaving that world behind. Not just trying, Lucian, actually doing it. I will. And until then, we do this my way. I stay in Providence. You can visit, but not at my apartment. We meet in public places, we keep things civil, and you don't try to control or dictate or threaten your way into getting what you want. She expected him to argue, to fall back into old patterns of dominance and control. Instead, he nodded slowly. Agreed, with one condition. What? You stop running. No more fake names, no more hiding, no more pretending we don't exist to each other. His thumb traced circles on her palm, a gesture so achingly familiar it made her throat tight. We're in this together now, whether we like it or not. Our son deserves parents who can at least be in the same room without it turning into a battlefield. That's what you want? Us being civil for the baby's sake? I want a lot more than that. The honesty in his voice cut through her defenses like a blade. But I'll settle for what I can get, for now. The baby kicked, hard enough that Nora gasped. Lucien's eyes went immediately to her belly, concern flashing across his face. Are you all right? I'm fine. She guided his hand to where the baby was moving, a gesture she made before thinking about what it meant. There. Feel that? Lucien's expression transformed. She watched wonder chase away the hardness, watched his dark eyes go soft with an emotion so pure it hurt to witness. His hand spread across her belly, trembling slightly, and when the baby kicked again, his breath caught. That's him, he whispered. That's my son. Our son. Our son. He looked up at her, and for just a moment she saw past the criminal, past the darkness, past all the terrible things she knew he'd done. She saw a man who wanted to be a father, who was willing to tear apart his entire world for a chance to hold his child without fear. She saw the man she'd loved before reality intervened. And Nora Whitmore realized, with a terror that eclipsed everything that had come before, that she might still love him now. The realization terrified her more than anything else that had happened in that impossible afternoon. Nora pulled her hand away from Lucien's, needing distance, needing air, needing to think clearly without the weight of his touch clouding her judgment. He let her go without protest, though she saw the flash of disappointment in his eyes before he masked it. I should get home, she said, gathering her purse. I have work in the morning. You're still working at the bookstore? Bills don't pay themselves. Let me help with that at least. He pulled out his wallet, but she stopped him with a sharp gesture. No, absolutely not. The moment I take your money is the moment you start thinking you own me again. I never thought I owned you, Nora. You just acted like it. She stood, her movements awkward with the weight of her belly. If you want to be part of this, you need to understand something fundamental. I'm not the same woman who left Boston 6 months ago. I'm not going to smile and nod while you make decisions for me. I'm not going to accept your version of reality without question, and I'm definitely not going to let you use money or power or fear to control what happens next. Lucien stood as well, his height suddenly oppressive in the small coffee shop. I understand. But do you? Because understanding and accepting are two different things. I understand that you're angry. I understand that you're scared. I understand that from your perspective, I'm the villain in this story. His voice dropped lower, intimate despite the public setting. But I also understand that we created a life together, and that gives both of us responsibilities we can't walk away from. So yes, Nora, I understand, whether you believe that or not. She wanted to argue, but exhaustion was creeping in at the edges of her consciousness. The confrontation had drained her more thoroughly than a full day of work ever could. All she wanted was to go home, lock her door, and pretend for a few hours that her carefully constructed world hadn't just imploded. How did you find me? She asked instead. Today, I mean. You said you've known where I was for months, but why show up now? Lucien's expression went carefully neutral. I have people watching you, not constantly, not invasively, just keeping an eye out, making sure you're safe. You've been stalking me. I've been protecting you from a distance. He held up a hand before she could interrupt. I know how that sounds. I know you think it's a violation, and maybe it is. But the world I exist in doesn't stop being dangerous just because you left it, Nora. There are people who would love to get their hands on something I care about, and you, pregnant or not, fall into that category. The implications of that made her stomach turn. Who knows about me? No one who matters. I've kept your existence carefully compartmentalized, made sure that the people in my organization think we ended badly, and I've moved on. As far as they're concerned, you're ancient history. He paused. But that doesn't mean you're safe. It just means you're safer than you would be if they knew the truth. And now? Now that you know about the baby? Now everything changes. The words carried a weight that made her shiver. Now I have to figure out how to protect both of you, while still dismantling an empire that doesn't want to be dismantled. Nora sank back into her chair, suddenly too tired to stand. This is insane, all of it. We're talking about criminal empires and protection and danger, like it's normal, like it's just part of everyday life. For me, it is. Lucien sat across from her again, his coffee long since gone cold. I was born into this world, Nora. My father was a soldier in the Moretti family, before it was my family. I grew up knowing that power was the only currency that mattered, that weakness got you killed, that loyalty was bought and sold like any other commodity. I didn't choose this life, it chose me long before I was old enough to understand what that meant. That doesn't excuse what you've become. No, he agreed quietly. It doesn't. But it explains it. And maybe, if you're willing to listen, you'll understand why getting out isn't as simple as just walking away. She should leave. Every rational instinct told her to get up, walk out, go back to her safe little apartment, and pretend this conversation never happened. But the baby was quiet now, and Lucien was looking at her with an intensity that bypassed all her defenses, and some traitorous part of her wanted to understand, wanted to believe that the man she'd loved might still exist somewhere beneath the monster. Tell me, she said softly. Tell me why it's so hard to leave. Lucien leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant, as if he was seeing something she couldn't. When you build power the way I have, you create a web of obligations and debts and dependencies that trap everyone involved. The people who work for me rely on me for their livelihoods, for their safety, for their sense of identity. The businesses I control, both legal and illegal, employ hundreds of people who have no idea they're part of a criminal organization. The politicians I've bought, the cops I've paid, the judges I own, they're all invested in maintaining the status quo because their careers, their fortunes, their futures depend on it. So you're saying you can't leave because too many people need you to stay? I'm saying that leaving creates a power vacuum, and power vacuums in my world tend to fill with violence. If I just walked away tomorrow, there would be war. Different factions fighting for control, innocent people getting caught in the crossfire, everything I built burning down in ways that would make the evening news for months. He rubbed his eyes, looking older than she'd ever seen him. I have to do this carefully. Transfer power to people who won't turn my organization into a bloodbath. Convert assets in ways that protect the legitimate businesses and the people who depend on them. Make deals with law enforcement to ensure that when the transition happens, it doesn't end with everyone in prison or dead. Deals with law enforcement? You mean you're working with the FBI? Among others. The admission seemed to cost him something. I'm not proud of it. Cooperating with the feds goes against everything I was raised to believe. But if it means my son grows up with a father who isn't in prison or 6 feet underground, I'll swallow my pride and do what needs to be done. Nora tried to process this new information and found herself floundering. The Lucien Moretti she thought she knew would never cooperate with law enforcement, would die before he turned informant. But then, the Lucien she thought she knew hadn't been real, just a careful construction designed to hide the truth. How long? She asked. How long have you been planning this? 3 months, like I said. Since late July. He met her eyes. I woke up one morning and realized I was 40 and alone, and that if I kept going the way I was going, I'd end up dead before 50. That's the average lifespan for men in my position, Nora. 50 years old. I started thinking about what that meant, about whether I wanted to spend the next decade looking over my shoulder and waiting for the bullet with my name on it, and I realized the answer was no. So this isn't about me, or the baby. You were already planning to get out before you knew. Does it matter? The question was genuine, not rhetorical. Does it change anything if my motivations were selfish before they became about you and our son? She didn't know how to answer that. Part of her wanted it to matter, wanted to believe that love was enough to inspire transformation. But maybe it was better this way. Maybe a decision made from self-preservation was more reliable than one made from romantic sentiment. What happens if you can't do it? She asked. What if the transition fails or someone decides they'd rather see you dead than gone? Then I die, and you disappear again. He said it matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. I've set up contingencies. Money and accounts you can access, new identities if you need them, people who will help you vanish so completely that no one will ever find you. If I fail, you and our son will still be protected. The casual way he discussed his own death made her chest tight. You can't talk about dying like it's inevitable. In my world, it's always inevitable. The only question is when and how. He reached across the table again, and this time she didn't pull away when he took her hand. But I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that when is decades from now, after I've watched my son grow up, after I've proven to you that I can be more than what I was. And if I can't forgive you, if I can never trust you again, then I'll live with that. His thumb traced patterns on her palm, gentle and hypnotic. I'll be the best father I can be, and I'll respect whatever boundaries you set, and I'll hope that maybe someday you'll see me as something other than the enemy. But even if you don't, even if you hate me for the rest of your life, I'll still be there for our son. That's not negotiable. Nora looked down at their joined hands and felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her. She could keep fighting, keep insisting on distance and boundaries and supervised visits. Or she could take a leap of faith that terrified her more than any physical threat. She could choose to believe that people could change, that love could redeem, that the future didn't have to be determined by the past. I need time, she said finally. Time to think, to process, to figure out what I'm willing to risk for our son's sake. How much time? I don't know. A few days? A week? She pulled her hand free and wrapped both arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the coffee shop. This is all happening too fast. 6 hours ago, I was just Julie Brennan, living a quiet life and counting down to a delivery I thought I'd face alone. Now you're here, and everything's different, and I can't think straight. Lucien nodded slowly. I can give you a week. But Nora... He waited until she met his eyes. Don't run. Don't disappear again. Whatever you decide about us, about me, about how we're going to navigate this, decide it here, where I can reach you if something goes wrong. What could go wrong? The look he gave her was ancient and weary. Everything. Anything. The world I'm trying to leave doesn't let people go easily, and there are forces in motion that I can't completely control. If something happens, if you're in danger, I need to be able to get to you fast." Fear coiled in her stomach. "Are you saying I'm not safe anymore? That knowing about the baby puts me at risk?" "I'm saying that the risk has always been there, whether you acknowledged it or not. I'm just being honest about it now instead of letting you pretend otherwise." He stood, and she saw him scan the coffee shop with the automatic wariness of someone who'd survived by never letting his guard down. "I'm going to assign security to watch your apartment. You won't see them, won't know they're there, but they'll make sure no one gets to you who shouldn't." "Lucien, this isn't negotiable." Steel entered his voice, the command of a man used to being obeyed. "You can hate me for it later, but right now, while everything is in flux, you need protection whether you want it or not." She wanted to argue, wanted to maintain her independence and her illusion of control, but the baby kicked again, a reminder that this wasn't just about her anymore. She was responsible for a life that couldn't defend itself, and pride seemed like a poor shield against genuine danger. "Fine," she said quietly, "but they stay outside. No surveillance inside my apartment, no tracking my movements, no reporting back about who I see or what I do." "Agreed." He pulled out his phone and typed something quickly. "It's done. You're covered as of now." The speed with which he could mobilize resources was both impressive and terrifying. How many people did Lucien Moretti have at his command, ready to act on his word without question or hesitation? How deep did his influence run, and what would it cost him to tear all of that down? "I really do need to go home," Nora said, standing for the second time. "It's been a long day. I'll walk you." "That's not necessary." "Humor me." He gestured toward the door. "Besides, I'd like to see where you're living. Make sure it's secure." She almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Lucien Moretti, crime boss and killer, playing the concerned father-to-be and worrying about apartment security. But there was genuine concern in his eyes, and she was too tired to keep fighting every small battle. "It's not far," she said. 10-minute walk. They left the coffee shop together, stepping into the autumn evening that had crept up while they talked. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and Providence looked almost magical in the fading light. Students hurried past on their way to evening classes or dinner with friends, their lives uncomplicated by criminal empires and impossible choices. Nora envied them with an intensity that surprised her. "Tell me about the bookstore," Lucien said as they walked. "What's it like?" The question was so normal, so divorced from everything else they'd discussed, that it took her a moment to formulate an answer. "It's small, independent. The owner is this 70-year-old woman named Margaret, who's been running it for 40 years and refuses to retire. We sell mostly used books, some new releases, and Margaret makes the best coffee in Providence, even though we're not technically a coffee shop." "You like it?" It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "I do. It's quiet and safe, and nobody asks questions I don't want to answer. Margaret hired me without checking references too carefully, and she pays me under the table so I don't have to worry about official paperwork." She glanced at him. "I know that probably sounds pathetic to you. Minimum wage work in a dusty bookstore when I could have been—" She stopped, not wanting to finish that sentence. "When you could have been living in a penthouse apartment in Boston, wearing designer clothes, and spending my money on whatever caught your fancy." He said it without judgment, just stating facts. "That life came with strings, Nora. You were right to cut them." "Was I?" "Because from where I'm standing, it seems like the strings never really got cut. They just got longer." He didn't have an answer for that, and they walked in silence for another block. The neighborhood was nicer than Nora had expected when she first moved here. Tree-lined streets and well-maintained buildings, the kind of place where young families pushed strollers and elderly couples walked small dogs. She'd chosen it specifically because it felt safe, normal, far removed from the world she'd left behind. Now Lucien Moretti was walking beside her, and that safety felt like another illusion dissolving in the fading light. "That one," she said, pointing to a brick building with bay windows and a small front garden. "Third floor." Lucien studied the building with an assessing eye that probably saw security flaws she'd never considered. "Exterior door lock?" "Yes. You need a key to get in." "Fire escape?" "On the back of the building. Why?" because fire escapes are easy access points for people who want to bypass the front door. He was already moving toward the building, and she followed reluctantly. Show me. Her apartment was exactly as she'd left it that morning, small, tidy, decorated with thrift store furniture and the kind of impersonal touches that suggested temporary residence rather than a real home. She watched Lucien examine everything with the thoroughness of a man cataloging weaknesses, and tried not to feel defensive about the modest space she'd carved out for herself. The locks are inadequate, he said after checking the windows. These latches wouldn't stop a determined teenager, let alone a professional. No one's trying to break into my apartment, Lucien. Not yet. He turned to face her. But if word gets out about the baby, if the wrong people decide that threatening my son is the best way to get to me, these locks won't even slow them down. The casual way he discussed potential threats to their unborn child made her nauseous. You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to be honest with you. There's a difference. He crossed to her, standing close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. I know you want to believe that leaving Boston meant leaving the danger behind, but it doesn't work that way. The only thing keeping you safe right now is that nobody knows you're important to me. The second that changes, you become a target. Then maybe you should stay away. Maybe the safest thing for our son is for you to have nothing to do with us. Pain flashed across his face, quick and sharp before he mastered it. Is that what you want? You want me to disappear, to pretend he doesn't exist, to let you raise him alone? I want him to be safe. Her voice broke on the last word. That's all I've ever wanted, and if you being in his life puts him in danger, me being in his life is the only thing that will keep him truly safe. Lucien cupped her face in his hands, the gesture both gentle and possessive. You think you can hide from my world, but you can't. It will find you eventually, whether I'm involved or not, because our son carries my blood, and that makes him part of it by birth. The only choice you have is whether he faces that world with his father's protection or without it. Tears stung her eyes. That's not fair. No, he agreed softly. It's not, but it's the truth, and I won't lie to you about it. Not anymore. She wanted to push him away, wanted to insist that he was wrong, that she could keep their son safe through sheer force of will and a different name in a different city. But looking into his eyes, she saw the absolute certainty of someone who knew exactly how the world worked and what it cost to survive in it. I hate this, she whispered. I hate that you're right. I hate that loving you means accepting things I never wanted to accept. I hate that our son will grow up knowing his father is... She stopped, unable to finish. Is what? A criminal? A killer? A man who built his fortune on other people's suffering. He said the words she couldn't, his voice rough with self-loathing. I know what I am, Nora. I've never pretended otherwise. Not to myself and not to you once you knew the truth. But I'm also a man who loves his son enough to tear apart everything he's built to give that boy a chance at a better life. That has to count for something. Does it? Or is it just another form of selfishness? You destroying your empire because you finally found something you want more than power? Maybe both. His thumbs brushed away tears she hadn't realized were falling. Maybe I'm selfish and calculating and every terrible thing you think I am, but I'm also his father, and I will do whatever it takes to protect him, even if that means protecting him from myself. The admission broke something inside her. She'd been so focused on seeing Lucien as the enemy, on maintaining her anger as armor against the complicated feelings she didn't want to examine, that she'd forgotten he was capable of this kind of raw honesty. The Lucien Moretti the world knew never showed vulnerability, never admitted doubt, never let anyone see the man beneath the monster. But here, in her small apartment with autumn light fading through the windows, he was just a man terrified of failing his child. 1 week, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You give me 1 week to think about what happens next. No pressure, no manipulation, no showing up unannounced, and then we'll talk about how to move forward. 1 week, he agreed. But I'm upgrading your locks tomorrow, and the security detail stays. Those are non-negotiable. Fine. He leaned down, and for a heart-stopping moment she thought he was going to kiss her. But he pressed his lips to her forehead instead, a gesture so achingly tender it made her chest hurt. Take care of yourself, he murmured against her skin. Both of you. Then he was gone, and Nora was alone in her apartment with her thoughts and her fears and a future that felt more uncertain than ever. The week that followed was the strangest of Nora's life. She went to work at the bookstore, helped customers find books, drank Margaret's excellent coffee, and pretended everything was normal. But nothing was normal. And she found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, wondering which of the people around her might be Lucian's security detail watching from the shadows. On Tuesday, she came home to find her apartment locks had been replaced with heavy-duty deadbolts that would have looked more appropriate on a bank vault. On Wednesday, a package arrived containing a new phone, encrypted, according to the note, with Lucian's number already programmed in. On Thursday, she woke to find a high-end security system had been installed overnight, complete with cameras at all entry points and a panic button she could press to summon immediate help. She should have been angry about the invasions of her privacy, the high-handed way Lucien was imposing his will on her space. But every time she thought about protesting, she remembered his words about fire escapes and inadequate locks, and people who might want to hurt their son as a way of hurting him. It was easier to accept the protection and tell herself it didn't mean anything. Margaret noticed something was different. The older woman had a sixth sense for when her employees were troubled, and she cornered Nora on Friday afternoon during a rare lull in customers. "You want to tell me what's going on, honey?" Margaret asked, handing Nora a cup of coffee despite knowing she was supposed to be limiting caffeine. "You've been jumpy all week, and you keep staring at your phone like you're expecting bad news." Nora wrapped her hands around the warm cup and tried to figure out how much truth she could safely share. "The baby's father showed up. He found out about the pregnancy." Margaret's eyebrows rose. "And you weren't planning to tell him?" "It's complicated." "It always is." Margaret settled into the chair behind the register, her weathered face sympathetic. "Is he trying to take the baby from you?" "No, he wants to be involved. He wants—" Nora stopped, frustrated by her inability to articulate the impossible situation. "He wants things I'm not sure I can give him." "Like what?" "Trust. Forgiveness. A second chance." The words came out bitter. "He hurt me, Margaret. Not physically, but he lied about who he was and what he did, and when I found out the truth I ran because I was scared of what it meant for our baby. And now? Now he says he's changing, leaving behind the things that made me run in the first place. And I want to believe him, but belief feels like weakness." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, her sharp eyes studying Nora with uncomfortable perception. "Can I tell you something I learned from 50 years of watching people?" "Please." "Everyone deserves the chance to change, but not everyone earns the right to be believed when they claim they're changing. The question you have to ask yourself isn't whether he's capable of change. Most people are, given the right motivation. The question is whether you're willing to risk being wrong about him again." The insight hit home with uncomfortable accuracy. What if I risk it and he fails? What if I let him into our lives and he ends up hurting our son the way he hurt me? "Then you deal with it." Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "You set boundaries, you protect your child, you make the hard choices that mothers have to make. But hiding and running and pretending the father doesn't exist, that's not protecting your son, honey. That's protecting yourself." Nora wanted to argue, wanted to insist that every choice she'd made had been about the baby's safety. But Margaret's words resonated with an uncomfortable truth she'd been avoiding. Part of her resistance to Lucian wasn't about protecting their son at all. It was about protecting her own heart from the risk of being broken again. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted quietly. "I don't know how to co-parent with someone I'm not sure I can trust. Nobody knows how at first. You figure it out as you go, and you make mistakes, and you try to do better next time." Margaret reached across the counter and squeezed Nora's hand. "But first you have to decide if you're willing to try at all." That night, alone in her apartment with the new security system beeping softly and the encrypted phone within reach, Nora made her decision. She picked up the phone and dialed the only number programmed into it. Lucian answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting for her call. "Nora, is everything all right?" "I want to meet," she said before she could lose her nerve. "Tomorrow, somewhere neutral. We need to talk about what happens next." There was a pause, and she could almost hear him processing this unexpected development. "Where?" "There's a park near the river, Roger Williams Park. Meet me by the pond at noon." "I'll be there." Lucienne." She stopped, unsure how to articulate what she needed to say. "This doesn't mean I've forgiven you." It doesn't mean I trust you. It just means I'm willing to try to figure out how we can both be in our son's life without destroying each other in the process. I understand. His voice was careful, controlled, as if he was afraid of saying the wrong thing and shattering this fragile detente. Thank you for giving me a chance. She hung up before she could second-guess herself, before fear could override the tentative hope beginning to take root in her chest. Margaret was right. She had to decide if she was willing to try. And despite everything, despite the fear and the anger and the very justified reasons to keep running, some part of her wanted to believe that second chances were possible. The question was whether that belief would save them or destroy them both. Saturday morning dawned cold and clear, the kind of October day that made Nora grateful for the wool coat she'd bought at a thrift store when autumn first arrived. She dressed carefully, choosing comfort over style. Maternity jeans that actually fit, a soft sweater that accommodated her growing belly, boots with good traction in case she needed to move quickly. The thought made her pause, made her wonder when she'd started thinking like someone who might need to run at a moment's notice. Living in Lucian's world had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. Roger Williams Park was beautiful in the late morning light, all golden leaves and quiet paths winding around the pond where families fed ducks and couples walked hand in hand. Nora found a bench with a clear view of the water and sat down to wait, her hands resting on her belly where the baby had been particularly active all morning. She wondered if he could sense her anxiety, if the stress hormones flooding her system were reaching him through the umbilical cord that connected them. She would have to get better at hiding her fear. Children learned what they lived, and she didn't want her son growing up knowing that his mother was always afraid. Lucien arrived exactly at noon, punctual as always. He wore dark jeans and a leather jacket instead of his usual suits, an attempt at casual that didn't quite work on someone who carried himself like he owned every space he entered. Two men in similar casual attire lingered near the parking lot, close enough to respond to trouble, but far enough to provide the illusion of privacy. "You brought bodyguards to a park meeting," Nora said, as he sat down beside her. "I bring bodyguards everywhere." He followed her gaze to the two men. "You just usually don't notice them." "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "It's supposed to keep us alive." He turned his attention to her, and she saw the dark circles under his eyes that suggested he'd been sleeping as poorly as she had. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "I almost didn't." The honesty came easier in the open air, with space between them and the autumn sun warm on her face. "I spent all night coming up with reasons why this was a terrible idea. And yet you're here. And yet I'm here." She watched a family of ducks glide across the pond, the ducklings following their mother in a perfect line. "I talked to someone, a friend. She helped me realize that I've been making decisions based on fear instead of what's actually best for our son." "What did you decide?" "That I can't keep running forever. That whether I like it or not, you're his father. And that means we need to find a way to coexist that doesn't involve lawyers and supervised visits and treating each other like enemies." She looked at him then, forcing herself to hold his gaze. "But I need you to understand something, Lucien. If we do this, if we try to figure out how to be parents together, it has to be on equal footing. No more making decisions for me. No more using your resources or your power to control the situation. We figure this out together, or we don't figure it out at all." He was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "That's going to be difficult for me." "I know. I'm used to controlling everything. It's how I've survived, how I've built what I have. Letting go of that control, trusting someone else to make decisions that affect my son." He stopped, shook his head. "It goes against every instinct I have." "Then you're going to have to develop new instincts." Her voice was firm despite the trembling in her hands. "Because I won't be bullied or manipulated or treated like I'm incapable of making choices. I've been doing fine on my own for 6 months, and I'll continue doing fine whether you're involved or not. The question is whether you can accept that partnership means compromise. And if I can't, then we go our separate ways and you get exactly what you're trying to avoid: supervised visits and legal boundaries and a son who grows up knowing his father couldn't bend enough to be in his life." She placed her hand over his where it rested on the bench between them. "But I don't think that's what you want. I think you want to be a real father, not just a name on a birth certificate and a check that arrives every month." His hand turned, fingers lacing through hers with a desperation that betrayed how much this meant to him. I want everything. I want to be there for midnight feedings and first steps and scraped knees and every moment in between. I want to teach him things, protect him, watch him grow into someone better than I ever was. His voice roughened. I want to be the kind of father I never had. The raw vulnerability in his admission cracked something in her chest. Then prove it. Not with money or security systems or promises about changing. Prove it by actually changing, by showing me through your actions that you're serious about leaving that world behind. I am serious. He pulled out his phone and showed her a document that meant nothing to her until he started explaining. This is the transfer agreement for my primary holdings in the Northeast Corridor. As of yesterday, control passed to Marcus Chen, someone I've been grooming for 2 years to take over the legitimate side of operations. He's clean, smart, and has no interest in perpetuating the criminal elements. Nora scanned the document, trying to make sense of legal language and corporate structures. What does this actually mean? It means I no longer control the shipping operations that were being used to move contraband. I no longer have access to the warehouses that stored illegal goods. I no longer profit from any activity that can't be reported to the IRS. He swiped to another document. This is the agreement I signed with federal prosecutors. I'm providing information about corruption in law enforcement and city government in exchange for immunity for myself and protection for my family. You're testifying against corrupt cops? Corrupt cops, judges, city council members, anyone who took my money and looked the other way while I built my empire. His expression was grim. It's not something I ever thought I'd do. Where I come from, cooperating with law enforcement is the ultimate betrayal. But the alternative is prison or death, and neither of those outcomes lets me be the father our son deserves. She studied his face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. But all she saw was exhaustion and determination and a kind of weary resignation that came from making impossible choices. How much danger are you in? She asked quietly. For doing this? Considerable. He didn't try to soften the truth. There are people who would kill me just for considering cooperation. The fact that I've actually followed through makes me a priority target for anyone who thinks my testimony could hurt them. And us? Are we in danger? Not as much as you'd think. The people who want me dead don't know you exist, don't know about the baby. As long as we keep it that way, you should be safe. He squeezed her hand. But that's why the security is so important, Nora. That's why I need to know you're protected, even when I can't be there myself. Fear curled in her stomach, but she pushed it down. How long until this is over? Until you've transitioned out completely? If everything goes according to plan, I should be clear by the end of January. All assets converted, all testimony given, all ties severed. He looked at her, and she saw the weight of that timeline in his eyes. Right around the time our son is due to be born. The timing felt significant, like some kind of cosmic deadline. Their baby would enter the world at the same moment Lucian exited the one he'd built over 15 years. The symmetry of it was almost too perfect, too neat for the messy reality of real life. What happens if the plan doesn't work? She asked. What if someone decides they'd rather see you dead than free? Then the contingencies I mentioned kick in. You and the baby disappear, my legitimate assets get transferred to a trust in his name, and you raise him somewhere safe with enough money to give him a good life. He said it calmly, as if discussing a business transaction rather than his own death. I've made sure you'll be taken care of regardless of what happens to me. I don't want your money, Lucy-chan. I want... She stopped, not sure she was ready to admit what she wanted. What? He turned to face her fully, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. What do you want, Nora? I want him to have a father, she whispered, not a trust fund or security measures or contingency plans. I want our son to grow up knowing his dad, learning from him, being loved by him. And I want... Her voice broke. I want to believe that the man I fell in love with was real, that he wasn't just a mask you wore to hide the monster underneath. He was real. Lucian's thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't felt fall. Everything I felt for you was real, Nora. The way I felt when you smiled, the way I couldn't stop thinking about you, the way being with you made me want to be better than I was. All of it was real. The only lie was what I did when you weren't looking, the empire I built in the shadows, while pretending to be someone you could love. I did love you. I do love you. The admission tore out of her before she could stop it. And I hate that I do. Hate that 6 months of running and hiding and trying to forget couldn't change how I feel. I hate that seeing you again makes me want things I know I shouldn't want. That being near you feels like coming home, even though I know how dangerous that home can be. He kissed her then, gentle and desperate and filled with everything they couldn't say. She kissed him back despite every rational thought screaming that this was a mistake, that physical intimacy would only complicate an already impossible situation. But rational thought had never stood a chance against the way Lucien made her feel, wanted, cherished, seen in ways no one else ever had. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his and tried to find her equilibrium. "This doesn't solve anything," she said. "I know. We still have to figure out how to actually make this work." "I know that too." He pressed a kiss to her temple, soft and reverent. "But it's a start. It's more than I thought I'd have a week ago." She wanted to stay there, wrapped in his arms with the autumn sun warm on her back, and the future feeling almost possible. But the baby kicked hard enough to make her gasp, a reminder that time was moving forward whether they were ready or not. "He's active today," she said, guiding Lucien's hand to where the baby was moving. Wonder transformed his expression, the hardness melting away to reveal something vulnerable and awed. "Does it hurt?" "Sometimes. Mostly it's just strange, feeling another person moving inside you." She smiled despite herself. "He likes to kick when I'm trying to sleep. I think he's already on a different schedule than me." My mother used to say I was the same way. The mention of his mother was unexpected. Lucien rarely talked about his family. She'd walk the floors at 3 in the morning because I wouldn't settle unless she was moving. "Will she want to meet him? Your mother?" Something shuddered in his expression. "My mother died 6 years ago. Cancer." "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "No reason you would." He kept his hand on her belly, feeling the baby move. "She would have loved you, would have been thrilled about becoming a grandmother. She spent years trying to convince me to settle down, have a family, give her grandchildren to spoil." "What about your father?" "Dead longer than my mother. He made enemies faster than he made money, and eventually one of those enemies caught up with him." Lucien's voice was flat, emotionless. "I was 15 when it happened. Came home from school and found him bleeding out on the kitchen floor. He lived long enough to tell me to run, to get out before whoever did this came back to finish the job." Nora's hand covered his, sharing the contact with their son. "Did you run?" "For about 6 months. Then I realized that running meant letting the men who killed him get away with it, meant giving up everything my father had built. So I stopped running and started fighting instead." He looked at her, his dark eyes holding shadows of the boy he'd been. "I was 17 when I killed my first man. One of the ones responsible for my father's death. I walked right up to him in broad daylight and put a bullet in his head, and I didn't feel guilty or scared or anything except satisfied that I'd evened the score." The casual way he discussed murder should have horrified her. Maybe it would have 6 months ago, before she'd read those files and understood the full extent of what Lucien was capable of. Now it just made her sad. For the boy who'd lost his father, for the teenager who'd chosen vengeance over safety, for the man who'd built an empire on violence because it was the only currency he understood. "That's not who I want our son to be," she said quietly. "I don't want him growing up thinking violence is the answer to every problem." "Neither do I." Lucien's hand pressed gently against her belly, as if he could shield their son from the truth of what his father had been. "That's why I'm getting out, Nora. Not because I suddenly developed a conscience or found religion or any of the other redemption stories people like to tell themselves. I'm getting out because I refuse to watch my son make the same mistakes I did, refuse to see him turn into the kind of man who sees murder as a reasonable business solution. People don't change overnight, especially people with your history." "No," he agreed, "they don't. Change is slow and painful and requires constant work. But I'm willing to do that work if it means my son doesn't have to." The baby kicked again, as if in response to his father's voice, and Nora felt something shift inside her, not just physically, but emotionally. Some barrier she'd been maintaining between them crumbled, allowing possibility to seep through the cracks. "I want to believe you," she said. "I want to believe that people can change, that love can redeem, that we can build something good out of this impossible situation. Then believe. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with old-fashioned gallantry. Give me a chance to prove it, and I swear I won't waste it. Before she could respond, one of the bodyguards was approaching, his expression urgent. Lucien's entire demeanor changed instantly, the tender father-to-be disappearing behind the dangerous man who'd survived 15 years at the top of a criminal empire. What is it? His voice was sharp, commanding. We have a situation. Marcus Chen just called. There's been an incident at the warehouse. 3 men dead, and the police are asking questions about ownership. Lucien cursed under his breath. I transferred ownership yesterday. It's not mine anymore. The paperwork hasn't been filed yet. On paper, you're still the owner of record. The bodyguard glanced at Nora, clearly uncomfortable discussing this in front of her. The police want to talk to you. They're on their way to your office now. Nora felt ice flood her veins. What kind of incident? The kind that makes the evening news, Lucien said grimly. He stood, already pulling out his phone. I need to handle this. Michael will take you home. Wait. She grabbed his hand. You can't just leave without explaining what's happening. What's happening is that someone is trying to sabotage my exit by linking me to criminal activity I'm no longer involved in. He squeezed her hand briefly. I need to deal with this before it becomes a bigger problem. How big a problem are we talking about? His expression was grim. Big enough that I might not make it to our next meeting. Big enough that you should be prepared for things to get complicated fast. Fear gripped her. Lucien, listen to me. He cupped her face in his hands, urgent and intense. If something happens, if I don't contact you within 48 hours, there's an envelope in your apartment, taped to the underside of your bathroom sink, where no one would think to look. Everything you need is in there. New identities, account numbers, contact information for people who will help you disappear. Do you understand? You're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. This is the part where my past catches up with the future I'm trying to build, and I don't know yet how it's going to play out. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, quick, desperate touches like he was memorizing the feel of her. I love you. I've loved you since the first moment I saw you, and I'll love you until the day I die. Whether that's tomorrow or 50 years from now. Then he was gone, striding toward a black SUV that appeared from nowhere, his bodyguards flanking him like a military escort. Nora watched him go with her heart in her throat, one hand pressed to her belly where their son was still moving, blissfully unaware that his father might be walking into danger. The bodyguard Michael approached carefully, his expression sympathetic. Ma'am, I should get you home. What's really happening? She demanded. The truth, not whatever sanitized version Lucien wanted me to hear. Michael hesitated, clearly weighing loyalty to his employer against compassion for the frightened woman in front of him. There was a hit at the warehouse, professional job, execution style, designed to look like a drug deal gone wrong. But it's not about drugs, it's about sending a message. What message? That Lucien Moretti doesn't get to just walk away, that the people he's testifying against aren't going to let him destroy them without a fight. Michael gestured toward a second SUV. We need to go, ma'am. Being out in the open like this makes you vulnerable. Nora let him guide her to the vehicle, her mind racing with implications she didn't want to examine. 3 men dead, police involvement, a message written in blood. This was the world Lucien lived in, the reality she'd been trying to escape, and it was catching up with them faster than either of them had anticipated. The drive back to her apartment passed in silence. Michael escorted her inside, checked every room with professional efficiency, then positioned himself outside her door like a sentinel. Nora locked herself in, checked the security system twice, and then sat down on her couch to process everything that had happened in the past 2 hours. She'd gone to the park planning to set boundaries, to establish rules for co-parenting, to figure out how to maintain emotional distance while still allowing Lucien to be part of their son's life. Instead, she'd admitted she still loved him, had kissed him in public, had listened to him talk about his violent past and his desperate attempts at redemption. And now he was walking into danger that might get him killed, and she was sitting in her apartment wondering if the envelope under her bathroom sink would end up being the last communication she ever received from him. The thought made her nauseous. She stumbled to the bathroom, falling to her knees in front of the toilet as morning sickness that should have passed months ago came roaring back with a vengeance. But this wasn't hormones, this was pure fear, the terror of losing someone she'd tried so hard to stop loving. When the nausea finally passed, she found herself reaching under the sink with trembling hands. The envelope was exactly where Lucian said it would be, sealed and marked with her name in his precise handwriting. She held it for a long moment, wondering if opening it would make everything too real, if keeping it sealed was a way of refusing to acknowledge that things might go catastrophically wrong. In the end, she opened it. Inside were multiple passports with different names and her picture, bank account numbers with balances that made her dizzy, and contact information for people identified only by first names and cities. But it was the letter that destroyed her, written in Lucian's hand and dated 3 weeks earlier. "Nora," it began, "if you're reading this, it means something went wrong with my transition out of the life. It means I'm either dead or in custody, and either way, I won't be there to protect you and our son the way I promised. I'm sorry for that. Sorry for dragging you into my world. Sorry for the danger my very existence puts you in. Sorry for not being strong enough or smart enough to find a way out that didn't end like this. But I need you to understand something. None of this is your fault. You didn't ask to fall in love with a criminal. You didn't know what I was when we started, and by the time you found out, it was too late. You were already pregnant, already tied to me in ways that can't be undone. I'm the one who brought this darkness into your life, and I'm the one who's responsible for whatever consequences follow. The information in this envelope will help you disappear. Use it. Take our son somewhere far away from Boston, from Providence, from anywhere my enemies might think to look. Change your name, change your appearance, change everything until you're someone completely new. And when our boy is old enough to ask about his father, tell him whatever you think is best. Tell him I was a good man who made bad choices. Tell him I loved him more than life itself. Tell him I died trying to give him a better world than the one I lived in. Or tell him nothing. Let him grow up thinking he never had a father, that you did this alone from the beginning. That might be easier, might spare him the complicated truth of what his father really was. I'll leave that choice to you. What I won't leave to chance is your safety, or his. The people listed in this envelope are loyal to me personally, not to the organization. They'll help you because I paid them to, because I made sure their families were taken care of, because they understand that protecting you is the last thing I'll ever ask of them. Trust them. They won't betray you. I love you, Nora. I loved you before I knew you were carrying my son, and I'll love you long after I'm gone. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. The only pure and good thing in a life filled with darkness. If I could go back and do things differently, I would. But since I can't, all I can do is make sure that my mistakes don't destroy you and our child. Be safe. Be happy. Build the life you deserve far away from the shadow of what I was. And if you ever think of me, try to remember the good moments before you knew the truth. Try to remember the man who loved you, even if you can't remember him with anything but regret. Always yours, Lucien. Nora read the letter 3 times before the tears came, hot and bitter and unstoppable. This was what he'd been carrying, the knowledge that every choice he made might be his last, that walking away from his empire might cost him everything, that the future he was trying to build with her could disappear in an instant of violence. And he was doing it anyway, for their son, for her, for the chance to be something other than what he'd always been. The baby kicked, bringing her back to the present. She pressed her hand to her belly and made a promise to the life growing inside her. Whatever happened next, whatever chaos Lucien's past brought into their lives, she would keep their son safe. She would be strong enough, smart enough, fierce enough to protect him from the darkness that came with being Lucien Moretti's child. But first she had to wait. Wait to see if Lucien survived whatever was happening at that warehouse. Wait to see if the police connection linked him to crimes he was trying to escape. Wait to see if the gamble he was taking on redemption would pay off or destroy them all. The waiting, she discovered, was the hardest part. Hours crawled by with no word, no update, no indication of whether the man she loved was alive or dead. She tried to eat but couldn't keep anything down, tried to sleep but startled awake at every sound, tried to read or watch television or do anything to distract herself from the terrible possibilities spinning through her mind. At midnight, her new encrypted phone finally rang. She grabbed it so fast she nearly dropped it, her hands shaking as she answered. "Lucien? It's me." His voice was rough, exhausted, but alive. "I'm okay. The situation is contained." Relief hit her so hard she had to sit down. "What happened?" "Long story. I'll explain when I see you, but Nora—" He paused, and she heard something in his voice that made her chest tight. "We need to talk. Soon. Things are accelerating faster than I anticipated, and we need to make some decisions about what happens next." "What kind of decisions?" "The kind that affect where you live, how you live, and whether our son enters this world with any semblance of normal safety." He sighed, the sound carrying the weight of exhaustion. "Can you come to Boston tomorrow?" Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to stay in Providence where she felt safe. But safety was an illusion now, had been an illusion all along. The only question was whether she faced the truth from a distance or stood beside Lucien while they navigated it together. "I'll come," she said quietly. "But Lucien, I found the envelope. I read your letter." Silence. Then, rough with emotion. "And? And I'm not running anymore. Whatever happens next, we face it together. For our son's sake, if nothing else." "Nora?" "Tomorrow," she interrupted, because if he started talking about love and sacrifice and all the reasons she should save herself, she'd lose her nerve. "Tell me when and where, and I'll be there." He gave her an address and a time, made her promise to let Michael drive her, reminded her twice to be careful. And when they finally hung up, Nora sat alone in her apartment and wondered if she'd just made the bravest decision of her life or the most catastrophically stupid. Only time would tell. And time, she was learning, had a cruel way of revealing truths that were better left hidden. The drive to Boston took 90 minutes through November rain that turned the highway into a ribbon of gray reflecting brake lights and anxiety. Nora sat in the back of the SUV while Michael navigated traffic with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. She was returning to the city she'd fled 6 months ago, walking back into Lucien's world with her belly swollen with his child and her heart full of feelings she couldn't afford to examine too closely. The smart thing would be to turn around, to maintain the distance she'd worked so hard to establish. But wisdom had never been her strong suit where Lucien Moretti was concerned, and their son deserved better than parents who communicated through lawyers and fought over custody from opposite sides of a courtroom. The address Lucien had given her wasn't the penthouse apartment where she'd lived with him, wasn't any of the properties she recognized from her time in Boston. Instead, Michael pulled up to a converted brownstone in the South End, the kind of building that housed young professionals and families rather than criminals and their mistresses. It looked almost aggressively normal, with window boxes full of late-season mums and a children's bicycle chained to the wrought iron fence. "He's inside," Michael said, opening her door. "Third floor. I'll be out here if you need anything." Nora climbed out carefully, her body's center of gravity shifted by the baby's weight. 7 months pregnant now, close enough to her due date that every twinge made her wonder if labor was starting early. The thought of giving birth in the middle of whatever crisis was unfolding made her chest tight with panic she couldn't afford to indulge. The building's interior was as normal as the exterior. Mailboxes in the lobby, stairs that creaked under her feet, the faint smell of someone's Sunday cooking lingering in the hallway. She climbed to the 3rd floor, found the apartment marked 3B, and knocked before she could lose her nerve. Lucien opened the door immediately, as if he'd been waiting right on the other side. He looked worse than he had yesterday. Exhaustion carved into every line of his face, his shirt rumpled like he'd slept in it, a shadow of stubble darkening his jaw. But his eyes lit up when he saw her, relief and something deeper flooding his expression. "You came." He stepped back to let her in. "I wasn't sure you would." "I said I would." She entered the apartment, taking in the sparse furnishings and impersonal decor of a place that was clearly temporary. "What is this place?" "Safe house. One of several I've maintained over the years for situations where I needed to disappear for a while." He closed the door and engaged 3 separate locks. "It's clean, no connection to my name or my organization, utilities paid through a shell company that can't be traced back to me." "How many safe houses do you have?" "Enough." He gestured toward a worn sofa. "Sit, please. You look exhausted." She was exhausted, but admitting it felt like weakness. Still, her back was aching, and the baby was pressing on her bladder, and standing seemed like more effort than it was worth. She sank onto the sofa with a gratitude she tried to hide. Lucienne sat across from her in an armchair, close enough to talk, but far enough to give her space. The careful distance felt deliberate, like he was trying not to spook her. "Tell me what happened yesterday," she said. The truth this time, not the sanitized version. He ran a hand through his hair, making it stand up in ways that would have been endearing if the situation wasn't so dire. The warehouse hit was orchestrated by Vincent Caruso. He's one of the people I'm testifying against, a captain in the organization who's been running protection rackets and loan sharking operations for the past decade. He found out about my cooperation with the feds and decided to send a message. By killing 3 people? By killing 3 of Marcus Chen's people and making it look like I ordered it. The goal was to invalidate the transfer agreement, make it look like I'm still actively involved in criminal activity, undermine my credibility as a witness. Lucian's expression was grim. It almost worked. The police showed up at my office ready to arrest me for murder conspiracy. It took 6 hours of lawyers and phone calls and evidence to convince them I wasn't involved. But you're not arrested? Not yet. But Caruso isn't done. He's desperate, cornered, and desperate men do unpredictable things. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. That's why I needed you to come here, Nora. Things are escalating faster than I anticipated, and Providence isn't safe anymore. Ice flooded her veins. What do you mean it isn't safe? I mean that Caruso knows about you now. I don't know how. Maybe he had people following me. Maybe there's a leak in my security. Maybe he's just better at intelligence gathering than I gave him credit for. But he knows I was in Providence last week. He knows I met with someone. And if he doesn't know who you are yet, it's only a matter of time before he figures it out. The room spun. Nora pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the baby kick as if in response to her spike in adrenaline. You said nobody knew. You said I was safe as long as we kept the baby secret. I thought you were. The anguish in his voice was real, raw. I've been so careful, Nora. So careful to keep you compartmentalized, to make sure no one in my organization knew you existed. But Caruso has resources I didn't account for, and now... He stopped, looked away. Now I have to figure out how to protect you from a man who has nothing to lose and every reason to hurt me through the people I love. What are my options? She forced the words past the fear constricting her throat. Run again? Disappear using the identities in that envelope? That's one option. I can have you out of the country by tomorrow, somewhere Caruso would never think to look. New name, new life, enough money to raise our son in comfort and safety. Without you. Without me, he confirmed quietly. I can't leave the country while I'm cooperating with federal prosecutors. I'm effectively under house arrest until the trials are done, which could take months. So yes, if you run, you do it alone. The thought of raising their son without Lucienne, of disappearing into some foreign country and building a life based on lies and false identities, made her want to weep. But the alternative, staying and risking both their lives, seemed equally impossible. You said that was one option. What's the other? You come back to Boston. You move in here with me where I can protect you personally. We accelerate the timeline for getting me clear of my obligations and we wait out the storm together. He met her eyes. It's dangerous, Nora. I won't lie about that. Caruso is going to keep pushing, keep testing my defenses, keep looking for weaknesses he can exploit. But at least this way we're together. At least our son knows his father. And if Caruso finds us, if he decides the best way to hurt you is to kill me and the baby, then he goes through me first. The deadly certainty in Lucienne's voice sent shivers down her spine. I know you think I'm trying to leave violence behind, and I am. But that doesn't mean I've forgotten how to protect what's mine. Anyone who tries to hurt you or our son will learn exactly why people feared me enough to build an empire. She should have been horrified by the casual way he discussed violence. Should have been running for the door and the relative safety of Michael's SUV. But instead she felt something shift inside her. Not acceptance exactly, but understanding. Lucian Moretti was a dangerous man, had always been a dangerous man, and that danger was part of what made him capable of protecting their son in ways ordinary fathers never could. If I stay, she said carefully, we do this right. No more secrets, no more lies, no more finding out important information after the fact. You tell me everything, every threat, every move Caruso makes, every development in your cooperation with the feds. I need to know what we're facing if I'm going to help you face it. Agreed. He moved to sit beside her on the sofa, close enough that she could feel his warmth. Full transparency from now on. You're my partner in this, not someone I need to protect from the truth. And when the baby comes, what happens then? When the baby comes, we figure out how to be parents while finishing what I started. We take shifts on night feedings and diaper changes and all the ordinary chaos of a newborn, and we do it together instead of you struggling alone in Providence while I send money and visit on weekends. His hand found hers, fingers lacing through. I want to be there, Nora, for all of it. The beautiful moments and the terrifying ones and everything in between. The baby kicked hard, as if voting for having his father present. Nora looked down at their joined hands and tried to calculate the risk of staying against the risk of running. Both options came with danger, with uncertainty, with the possibility of catastrophic failure. But only one option gave their son a chance at having both parents present from the moment he drew his first breath. "How long until you're clear?" she asked. "Really clear, not just mostly clear. If everything goes perfectly. 6 weeks?" January 1st is my target date for having all assets transferred, all testimony given, all ties to the criminal organization completely severed. He squeezed her hand. "I know that's cutting it close to your due date. I know it means you'll be in your 3rd trimester while we're dealing with the most dangerous part of the transition. But I can't make it happen any faster without raising red flags that might get us all killed. 6 weeks?" She turned the timeline over in her mind. "And you really think we can stay safe that long with Caruso looking for weaknesses? I think we have a better chance together than apart. And I think our son deserves to be born into a situation where his parents are united instead of scattered across different continents." Lucien's other hand came up to cup her cheek, turning her face toward his. "I love you, Nora. I love you, and I love our son. And I will do whatever it takes to make sure you're both safe, even if that means becoming someone I swore I'd never be." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I'm working with federal prosecutors, testifying against people I've known for years, violating every code I was raised to honor. In my world, that makes me the worst kind of traitor. But I'll be a traitor 1,000 times over if it means our son grows up with a father who isn't dead or in prison." The raw honesty in his voice undid something in her chest. She leaned into his touch, letting herself be held for the first time since he'd walked back into her life. His arms came around her immediately, careful of her belly, and she felt the tremor in his hands that betrayed how much this meant to him. "I'm scared," she whispered against his shoulder. "I know, so am I. What if we can't do this? What if it all falls apart? Then we rebuild, and if we can't rebuild, we run, but we do it together." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "No more running alone, Nora. No more facing impossible choices without backup. From now on, we're a team." She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that partnership was possible between two people with so much history and hurt between them, but belief required faith, and faith required letting go of the fear that had been her constant companion for 6 months. "I'll stay," she said finally. "But if things get too dangerous, if it looks like Caruso is getting close, I'm gone. I won't risk our son's life on the hope that your security measures hold." "Fair enough." He pulled back just far enough to look at her. "I'll have your things brought from Providence. You can set up the 2nd bedroom however you want. It'll be the baby's room eventually, but for now, it's yours if you need space. We're really doing this, living together while you dismantle your empire and I grow increasingly pregnant and uncomfortable." "Apparently so." A smile ghosted across his face, the first she'd seen since yesterday. "It's going to be strange, isn't it? Playing house while the world burns down around us." "That's one way to put it." She stood, her back protesting the movement. "Can I see the apartment? Figure out where I'll be sleeping and where we'll put the baby?" He gave her a tour of the small space. 2 bedrooms barely big enough for beds, a kitchen with outdated appliances, a bathroom with ancient tile that probably hadn't been updated since the 70s. It was a far cry from the luxury of the penthouse where she'd lived with him before, but it felt safer somehow, more real, less like a beautiful cage and more like an actual home. "The baby's room," Lucien said, opening the door to the smaller bedroom. "I know it's not much, but we can fix it up. Paint, furniture, whatever you want." Nora stepped into the empty room and tried to imagine their son sleeping here. Tried to picture a crib and changing table and all the ordinary paraphernalia of new parenthood. It should have felt impossible, preparing a nursery in a safe house while running from criminals who wanted them dead. But somehow it felt right, like they were building something real in the middle of chaos. "We'll need to go shopping," she said. "Crib, clothes, diapers, all the things I was planning to buy slowly in Providence and now have to acquire in a hurry. Make a list. I'll have everything here by the end of the week." He leaned against the door frame, watching her move around the small space. "You should rest. You've been traveling all morning, and stress isn't good for the baby." "I'm fine." "Nora." He said her name gently but firmly. "You are 7 months pregnant, and you just learned that a dangerous man is trying to find you. You're allowed to not be fine." The permission to be weak, to be scared, to be human instead of strong, nearly broke her. She sank onto the floor, there was no furniture yet, and pressed both hands to her belly where the baby was moving restlessly. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I don't know how to be pregnant and terrified and in love with someone who might get us all killed. I don't know how to prepare for a baby while preparing to run for my life. I don't know how to trust you when trusting you before nearly destroyed me." Lucian sat down beside her, his back against the wall, their shoulders touching. "You do it one day at a time. One decision at a time. One moment of choosing to stay instead of run." He took her hand. "And you do it knowing that I'm right here with you, facing the same fears, making the same impossible choices." "What if it's not enough? What if love and determination and all our best intentions can't protect our son from the consequences of your past? Then we deal with those consequences together." He brought her hand to his lips. "But I refuse to believe that our son is doomed before he's even born. I refuse to accept that the mistakes I made before I knew he existed will define his entire life. We can choose differently, Nora. We can build something better." She leaned her head on his shoulder and let herself rest just for a moment in the fragile peace of believing him. Outside, rain continued to fall on Boston's streets. Somewhere in the city, Vincent Caruso was plotting their destruction. Federal prosecutors were building cases that would send powerful people to prison. And in 6 weeks, if everything went according to plan, Lucien Moretti would be free of the empire he'd spent 15 years building. But right now, in this moment, they were just two people sitting in an empty room, preparing to become parents while the world burned around them. The next 3 weeks blurred together in a strange mix of domesticity and danger. Nora moved into the safe house completely, abandoning her Providence apartment without regret. Her belongings arrived in boxes that she unpacked slowly, finding places for her books and clothes and drawers and closets that had to accommodate Lucien. And things, too. They developed routines: coffee in the morning, quiet dinners cooked together in the cramped kitchen, evenings spent reading or talking or just existing in the same space. It would have felt almost normal, if not for the constant presence of security. Michael and 2 other guards maintained 24-hour surveillance. Lucien's phone rang at all hours with updates from his lawyers, his accountant, his federal handlers. And every few days, another piece of his empire crumbled away. Assets transferred, operations shut down, people moving on to different organizations or different lives. Nora watched it all with a mixture of fascination and horror. This was what dismantling power looked like. Not dramatic or cinematic, just a slow, grinding process of paperwork and phone calls and difficult conversations. Lucien spent hours each day in meetings she wasn't allowed to attend, came back looking hollowed out and ancient, and then somehow found the energy to ask about her day and feel the baby kick, and help her assemble the crib that arrived in a dozen confusing pieces. "I think Part C is supposed to connect to Part F," she said one evening, frowning at the incomprehensible instructions. "Part C doesn't fit Part F. We're missing a piece." Lucien examined the hardware with the same intensity he probably brought to criminal enterprises. "Did we use all the screws in bag 2? I think so. Maybe. I can't tell anymore." She laughed despite herself. "This is absurd. You've orchestrated million-dollar deals and coordinated complex criminal operations, and you can't figure out how to assemble a crib." Criminal operations came with better instructions. But he was smiling, the stress of the day momentarily forgotten. "And usually I had people to do this kind of thing for me." "Well, you're going to be a hands-on father now. Better get used to doing things yourself." "Is that what I'm going to be?" He looked up from the crib parts, his expression vulnerable. "A hands-on father? If you want to be." She moved closer, running her hand through his hair in a gesture that had become familiar over the past weeks. You've been here every day, Lucien. You've come to doctor's appointments and helped me pick out baby clothes and assembled furniture badly. That's what hands-on fathers do. I'm terrified I'm going to screw it up. The admission came out rough. That I'll be too damaged from my past, too violent in my instincts, too broken to be what he needs. You think I'm not terrified too? I'm 26 years old and about to be responsible for another human life. I have no idea what I'm doing. She cupped his face in her hands, making him meet her eyes. But we'll figure it out together. We'll make mistakes and learn from them and do better next time. That's all any parent can do. He kissed her then, slow and deep, and filled with everything they'd been dancing around for weeks. The attraction had never died, had never even dimmed, despite 6 months apart and all the reasons they should hate each other. And now, living together, sharing space and meals, and the intimate details of daily life, that attraction had been building pressure like water behind a dam. Nora, he murmured against her lips. We shouldn't. Why not? She kissed him again, harder this time. We're adults. We're having a baby together. We're living in the same apartment. Why shouldn't we acknowledge that we still want each other? Because I don't want to complicate things. Because you need to be able to leave if things go wrong. And if we... He stopped, seemed to struggle for words. I don't want you to stay out of some misguided sense of obligation or because we're sleeping together again. Is that really what you think? That I'd stay because of sex? She pulled back, hurt and insulted. I'm here because I choose to be. Because our son deserves both his parents. Because despite everything, I still believe you're capable of changing. Sex has nothing to do with it. Then why bring it up? Because I'm tired of pretending we don't feel anything. Tired of dancing around the fact that I still love you even though I probably shouldn't. Tired of sleeping alone in the next room when what I really want is to fall asleep in your arms. Her voice cracked. I've been alone for 6 months, Lucien, and I'm tired of being alone. He stood, pulling her up with him, and for a moment she thought he was going to argue, to maintain the careful distance they'd been preserving. But instead he kissed her with a desperation that matched her own, his hands careful on her body, as if she was something precious he was afraid of breaking. If we do this, he said against her mouth, we do it right. No halfway measures, no pretending it doesn't mean anything. I love you, Nora. I've loved you since the beginning, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise. Then stop pretending. She took his hand and led him toward his bedroom, toward the bed they'd been carefully not sharing. Show me. They made love slowly, carefully, with an intensity born from months of separation and the knowledge that every moment together was borrowed time. Lucien touched her like she was sacred, mapping every change pregnancy had wrought on her body with reverent attention. And when they finally came together, it felt like coming home, like all the pieces that had been scattered finally sliding back into place. Afterward, lying in his arms with the baby kicking between them, Nora felt something like peace settle over her. This was what she wanted. Not the danger or the chaos or the constant fear, but this. Lying beside the man she loved, feeling their son move inside her, believing that the future might actually be possible. What are you thinking? Lucien asked, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. That I'm happy. Right now, in this moment, I'm happy. She turned to face him. That's strange, isn't it? Being happy in the middle of all this chaos? Not strange. Human. He kissed her forehead. We're allowed to find joy wherever we can, even when the world is falling apart around us. The moment shattered 3 hours later when Lucien's phone rang with news that sent him into immediate crisis mode. Nora watched him transform from relaxed lover to dangerous operative in the space of a heartbeat, saw the careful mask slam down over the vulnerability he'd been showing her. What happened? She asked as he pulled on clothes with military efficiency. Caruso made a move, tried to hit one of the prosecutors building the case against him. But Lucien was already calling his security team, issuing orders in the clipped tones of command. The prosecutor is fine. FBI had him under protection. But this changes everything. How? Because Caruso just committed a federal crime that's going to accelerate the entire timeline. The feds are going to move up the trials, push for immediate arrests, force everyone involved to pick sides faster than planned. He looked at her, his expression grim. We need to be ready to move. Pack a bag with essentials, clothes, documents, anything you can't live without. Keep it by the door. Fear iced her veins. You think we're going to have to run? I think we need to be prepared for anything. He crossed to her, cupped her face in his hands. I will keep you safe, Nora. I will keep our son safe. But you need to trust me and do exactly what I say when I say it. Can you do that? She nodded, too frightened to speak. Good. He kissed her hard and fast. I have to go meet with my lawyers and the federal prosecutors. Michael will stay with you. Don't leave the apartment. Don't answer the door for anyone. And if something feels wrong, use the panic button. Then he was gone, and Nora was alone with her fear and the baby kicking restlessly inside her. She did as Lucien instructed, packing a bag with the essentials she'd need if they had to disappear. Clothes that would fit her expanding body, copies of medical records, the ultrasound pictures she couldn't bear to leave behind. She checked the panic button 3 times, making sure she knew exactly how to activate it, if needed. The hours crawled by with no word from Lucien. Michael maintained his post outside the door, stone-faced and silent. Nora tried to eat, but her stomach rejected everything, tried to sleep but startled awake at every sound. The baby seemed to sense her distress, moving almost constantly, as if he was trying to reassure her that he was still there, still okay. At 3 in the morning, Lucien finally returned. He looked haggard, worn down to bone and will, but there was something in his expression that made her sit up from where she'd been dozing on the couch. It's done, he said quietly. Caruso's been arrested. Federal agents picked him up 2 hours ago on charges of attempted murder of a federal official. He's going away for a long time, Nora. Long enough that he'll never be a threat to us again. Relief hit her so hard she started shaking. And the others? The people you were testifying against? Most of them are scrambling to cut deals now that Caruso's shown how desperate the situation is. The smart ones are cooperating. The stupid ones are going to trial and losing. He sank onto the couch beside her, suddenly looking every one of his 38 years. It's almost over. Another 3 weeks, and I'll be completely clear. No more testimony, no more obligations, no more ties to anything criminal. 3 weeks. She did the math quickly. That puts us at December 22nd, 3 weeks before my due date. I know. He pulled her against his side, and she felt him trembling with exhaustion and relief. I know the timing is insane, but I can't make it happen any faster. The legal process has its own timeline. What happens after? When it's all done and you're clear? We live. He said it simply, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. We raise our son together. We build something normal and ordinary and safe. We become people who worry about pediatrician appointments and sleep schedules instead of criminal enterprises and federal prosecutions. It sounded like a fantasy, too good to be true. But looking at Lucien's face, seeing the desperate hope there mixed with the bone-deep exhaustion, Nora chose to believe. Chose to trust that the future they were fighting for might actually be possible. Okay, she whispered. 3 more weeks. We can survive 3 more weeks. But even as she said it, she felt the baby kick hard enough to take her breath away, and she wondered if their son would have the patience to wait that long before demanding his entrance into the world. Their son had other plans. Nora woke at 4 in the morning on December 10th with a sensation that felt like someone was squeezing her entire midsection in a vice. She lay perfectly still for a moment, trying to convince herself it was just Braxton Hicks' contractions, the practice labor her doctor had warned her about. But then another wave hit, stronger this time, and she knew with absolute certainty that this was real. Lucien. Her voice came out shakier than she intended. Lucien, wake up. He was awake instantly, the way he always was, fully alert from dead sleep like someone who'd trained himself never to be caught vulnerable. What's wrong? I think I'm in labor. The words hung in the air between them for a heartbeat before Lucien exploded into action. He was out of bed, pulling on clothes, reaching for his phone, all while firing questions at her with the precision of someone running a military operation. How far apart are the contractions? When did they start? Have you been timing them? Is there any bleeding? I don't know, just now. No, and no. Another contraction gripped her, and she had to breathe through it before she could speak again. But Lucien, it's too early. I'm only 36 weeks. He's not supposed to come for another month. Babies come when they come. He was already dialing, and she heard him speaking rapidly to someone on the other end. Get the car ready. We're going to Mass General, now. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of pain and fear. Contractions were coming every 8 minutes now, regular enough that the nurses took her seriously when they arrived at the emergency entrance. Lucienne stayed by her side through the admission process, through the wheelchair ride to labor and delivery, through the examinations that confirmed what she already knew. "You're 4 centimeters dilated," the nurse said cheerfully, as if this was wonderful news instead of terrifying. "Looks like you're having a baby today, Mama." "But it's too early." Nora gripped Lucien's hand hard enough to hurt. "He's not fully developed yet. His lungs aren't ready." 36 weeks is early, but not dangerously so, the doctor said, appearing with the calm competence of someone who'd delivered 1,000 babies. "We'll monitor him closely, but babies born at this stage usually do just fine. Let's get you settled in a room and see how things progress." The labor room was nothing like the peaceful birth environment Nora had imagined during her pregnancy. Medical equipment beeped and hummed around her. Monitors tracked the baby's heartbeat and her contractions. And every few minutes, someone new came in to check her progress, or ask questions, or adjust something. Through it all, Lucien stayed beside her, his hand in hers, his presence the only constant in the chaos. "I'm scared," she admitted during a brief lull between contractions. "I know." He brushed hair back from her forehead, his touch gentle despite the tension she could feel radiating from him. "I'm scared too. What if something goes wrong? What if he's not okay?" "Then we deal with it." His voice was firm, absolute. "But he's going to be fine, Nora. He's strong, just like his mother." The hours blurred together in waves of pain that grew progressively worse. Nora had read about labor, had taken classes, had thought she was prepared for what giving birth would feel like. But nothing could have prepared her for this. The all-consuming intensity of it, the way pain erased everything else until there was nothing but the contraction and the desperate need to breathe through it. Lucien stayed with her through all of it. When she squeezed his hand hard enough to leave marks, he didn't flinch. When she screamed through a particularly brutal contraction, he murmured encouragement. When she begged for drugs to make it stop, he held her and told her she was doing amazingly, that she was the strongest person he'd ever known. "I can't do this," she gasped as the contractions hit the 7-minute mark. "Lucienne, I can. It's too much." "Yes, you can." He pressed his forehead to hers, making her look at him. "You ran from me when you thought I was dangerous. You built a new life from nothing. You've been preparing for this moment for months. You are the woman who survived loving me. You can survive anything." She wanted to laugh at the absurdity of that logic, but another contraction hit and all she could do was breathe and squeeze his hand and try to believe him. By noon, she was 8 centimeters dilated and seriously reconsidering every choice that had led to this moment. The epidural had helped with the pain but left her feeling disconnected from her own body, like she was watching everything happen from a distance. Lucien had left briefly to take phone calls he couldn't ignore, and the nurse had assured her that first babies usually took their time. But when Lucien's phone rang again at 1:30, the timing couldn't have been worse. "I have to take this," he said, looking at the screen with an expression that made her stomach clench. "It's my lawyer. The final transfer. Go." She waved him toward the door, even though the thought of him leaving made her want to cry. "I'm fine. The nurse said it'll probably be hours still." He hesitated, clearly torn between the two most important things in his life. "Nora, Lucienne, this is what you've been working toward for months. If you miss this call, if the transfer doesn't go through..." She stopped as another contraction built, breathing through it with the discipline she'd learned. "I'll be fine. Michael is right outside. I'm surrounded by doctors and nurses. Go do what you need to do." He kissed her hard, fast, desperately. "I'll be back in 10 minutes, 15 at most. Don't have the baby without me." "I'll do my best." But their son had inherited his father's sense of timing and his mother's stubborn refusal to follow anyone else's schedule. 20 minutes after Lucien left, Nora's water broke in a sudden gush that soaked the bed and sent the medical staff into high alert. 25 minutes after that, she was fully dilated, and the doctor was telling her it was time to push. "We need to wait for the father," Nora gasped between contractions. "He's just taking a phone call. He'll be right back." "I'm afraid the baby has other ideas," the doctor said gently. "We need to start pushing, Nora. Your son is ready to be born." Terror and determination warred inside her. She wanted Lucien there, wanted him to see their son enter the world, wanted to share this impossible moment with the man who'd helped create it. But the pressure was unbearable, the need to push overwhelming everything else, and she realized with sudden clarity that she was going to do this alone after all. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, let's do this." Pushing was simultaneously the hardest and most natural thing she'd ever done. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to bear down, to work with the contractions instead of fighting them, to bring her son into the world through sheer force of will. She pushed through 3 contractions, 4, 5, feeling the baby move lower with each effort. "I can see the head," the doctor announced. "You're doing great, Nora. 1 or 2 more big pushes and he'll be here." The door burst open and Lucien rushed in, his phone still in his hand, his expression wild. "I'm here." "I'm sorry, I'm here." Relief flooded through her so powerfully she nearly sobbed. "You made it. I'll always make it." He was at her side instantly, taking her hand, his other arm supporting her shoulders. "What do you need? What can I do?" "Just stay." She gripped his hand as another contraction built. "Just stay with me." "Always," he promised. And then the doctor was telling her to push, and Lucien was counting her through it, and the world narrowed down to the 3 of them, mother, father, and the child fighting to be born. The final push felt like it lasted forever, and no time at all. Nora bore down with everything she had, felt something give way, heard the doctor's triumphant announcement, and then a cry. High and thin and absolutely perfect. "It's a boy," the doctor said, as if they didn't already know, as if they hadn't been preparing for this moment for months. A beautiful, healthy baby boy. They placed him on Nora's chest, this tiny, squalling creature with dark hair plastered to his head and eyes squeezed shut against the light. He was smaller than she'd expected, all delicate limbs and fragile perfection, and looking at him made her chest crack open with a love so fierce it bordered on pain. "Hi, baby," she whispered, touching his impossibly soft cheek. "Hi, sweetheart. We've been waiting for you." Lucien was crying. She looked up and saw tears streaming down his face, all his careful control shattered by the reality of his son. He reached out with a trembling hand to touch the baby's tiny fingers, and when those fingers wrapped around his, something in his expression transformed. "He's perfect," Lucien said hoarsely. "Nora, he's perfect. He's ours." She leaned into Lucien's embrace, the 3 of them forming their first family huddle. "He's really ours." The medical staff gave them a few precious minutes before whisking the baby away for measurements and tests. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, 19 inches long, APGAR scores of 8 and 9. Everything normal, everything healthy, despite being 4 weeks early. "What are you going to name him?" the nurse asked as she swaddled the baby in a hospital blanket. Nora and Lucien looked at each other, and she saw the question in his eyes. They'd discussed names, had narrowed it down to a few favorites, but had never quite agreed on which one felt right. "Theo," she said softly. "Theo Moretti Hale. Both our names, so he knows where he came from." "Theo," Lucien repeated, testing the name. "Theodore?" "Just Theo. It means gift, and that's what he is." She watched the nurse settle their son in the clear plastic bassinet, a gift we didn't know we needed. They brought Theo back after what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Nora held him against her chest, marveling at how something so small could feel so heavy with importance. Every feature was a miracle. The tiny nose, the rosebud mouth, the dark eyes that opened briefly to look at her with unfocused newborn wonder. "He has your eyes," Lucien said, settling beside them on the hospital bed. "And your hair. Look how dark it is. Your mother's nose, I think. I remember you showing me pictures. Your stubborn chin. We're in trouble when he's a teenager." They fell into easy conversation, pointing out features and making predictions about who he'd look like, what kind of personality he'd have, what his first word would be. It felt surreal, this normalcy in the middle of everything else. But Nora clung to it like a lifeline. Lucien's phone buzzed on the bedside table, and she saw his expression shift as he read the message. "It's done," he said quietly. The final transfer went through at 2:15, Everything, all the assets, all the holdings, all the remnants of what I built, it's gone, converted to legitimate businesses or sold off completely. You're free. She hardly dared to believe it. I'm free. He looked at Theo sleeping peacefully in her arms. He was born at 1:47, 12 days before my deadline, Nora. 12 days before I would have run out of time. The timing felt significant, like some kind of cosmic alignment. Their son had entered the world at the exact moment his father was exiting the criminal one, as if the universe was drawing a line between the past and the future. What happens now? Nora asked. Now we go home. We figure out how to be parents. We build the life we've been fighting for. He leaned over to kiss her forehead, then Theo's. And we do it together, all three of us. The next 3 days passed in the strange, timeless bubble of new parenthood. Nora learned to breastfeed with the help of patient nurses who assured her that yes, it was supposed to feel awkward at first, and no, she wasn't doing it wrong. Lucian learned to change diapers with the intensity he'd once brought to criminal enterprises, determined to master this new skill. Together they learned to swaddle, to soothe, to interpret the different cries that meant hungry versus tired versus just generally displeased with the world. Theo was a relatively easy baby as these things went. He ate well, slept in 2-hour stretches that felt impossibly short, and only screamed when he had a legitimate complaint. Nora found herself falling more in love with him every hour, every moment revealing new dimensions of this tiny person they'd created. Watching Lucien with Theo was its own revelation. The man who'd built an empire through violence and intimidation was impossibly gentle with his son, holding him like he was made of spun glass, speaking to him in soft murmurs about everything and nothing. He was terrified of doing it wrong, she could tell, but he refused to let that fear stop him from being present for every moment. On the second day, a social worker came to discuss discharge plans and support systems. Nora watched Lucien charm her with the same ease he'd once used to manipulate business rivals, except this time it was genuine, a father desperate to prove he could provide a stable home for his son. And your living situation? The social worker asked, pen poised over her clipboard. We have an apartment in the South End, Lucien said. 2 bedrooms, fully furnished, nursery ready for when he comes home. And your employment, Mr. Moretti? I'm in the process of transitioning careers. My previous work in import-export is winding down, and I'm moving into commercial real estate development. It was technically true, if you ignored the criminal nature of the import-export business. I have sufficient resources to support my family during the transition. The social worker made notes that Nora couldn't read from her angle. And you, Ms. Whitmore? Do you have family support in the area? It's Hale, Nora corrected gently. Nora Hale. And no, my family isn't in the picture. But Lucien and I are committed to co-parenting, and we have resources to help with childcare when needed. More notes, more questions, and finally, approval for discharge the following day if Theo continued to do well. That night, with Theo sleeping in his bassinet between their beds, Lucien took Nora's hand in the darkness. I got confirmation today, he said quietly. The federal trials are scheduled to start in February. I'll have to testify, but my lawyer thinks I'll be done by March at the latest. And then? And then it's really over. No more looking over my shoulder, no more wondering if today is the day my past catches up with me. Just us and Theo, and whatever future we build. Nora squeezed his hand, watching the rise and fall of their son's chest in the dim light. What kind of future do you want to build? The boring kind, he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. The kind where our biggest crisis is whether Theo is getting enough tummy time, and our most important decision is what preschool to send him to. The kind where violence is something we read about in the news, not something we live with every day. That sounds perfect. It sounds impossible, but then again, so did this. He gestured to encompass the hospital room, the sleeping baby, the two of them together after everything that had tried to tear them apart. And we're here anyway. They brought Theo home on a cold December afternoon, the safe house apartment transformed by the presence of this tiny new person. Nora settled into the rocking chair they'd bought third hand, nursing Theo while Lucien unpacked the discharge papers and medications and dozens of informational pamphlets the hospital had sent them home with. We're supposed to schedule a pediatrician appointment within the week, he said, reading through the instructions. And watch for signs of jaundice. And make sure he's eating every 2 to 3 hours. He's eating fine. Look at him. Theo was nursing contentedly, his little hand resting against her breast, his eyes closed in newborn bliss. What about you? Are you supposed to be doing anything special? The paperwork says something about postpartum recovery. I'm fine, Lucian. She smiled at his obvious anxiety. Sore and tired, but fine. Women have been doing this for thousands of years. That doesn't mean I'm not going to worry. The first night home was harder than the hospital had been. Theo woke every 90 minutes to eat, and each time Nora had to drag herself from sleep to feed him while Lucienne hovered anxiously, asking if he could help, if she needed anything, if the baby seemed okay. By 4 in the morning, they were both exhausted and slightly delirious, and Nora found herself laughing at the absurdity of it all. What's funny? Lucienne asked, walking Theo around the small living room while she tried to recover enough energy for the next feeding. Us. 3 weeks ago, you were dismantling a criminal empire, and I was terrified we were all going to die. Now we're just two exhausted parents trying to figure out how to keep a tiny human alive. She yawned hugely. It's the most normal thing in the world, and somehow that makes it miraculous. He smiled, pressing a kiss to Theo's dark hair. Miraculous is a good word for it. The days blurred into weeks as they found their rhythm. Nora healed slowly from childbirth, her body recovering while adjusting to the demands of breastfeeding around the clock. Lucien threw himself into fatherhood with the same intensity he'd once brought to criminal enterprise, reading books about infant development and baby sleep patterns and how to build secure attachment. Christmas came and went in a haze of feedings and diaper changes. They hung a small wreath on the door and put a tiny Santa hat on Theo for a picture that made Nora's heart melt. Lucien's final testimony was scheduled for January 15th, exactly 1 month after Theo's birth, and as the date approached, she could see the tension building in him again. What if something goes wrong? He asked one night, holding Theo while Nora tried to eat dinner with both hands for the first time in days. What if my testimony isn't enough, or someone decides I'm too dangerous to let walk free? Then we deal with it. She used his own words back at him. But you've done everything they asked, Lucien. You've cooperated fully, provided evidence that's put dozens of criminals behind bars. They have no reason to go after you. Reason doesn't always matter in the legal system. Then have faith. She took Theo from him so he could eat his own dinner. Have faith that we didn't go through all of this just to have it fall apart now. The night before his testimony, Lucien couldn't sleep. Nora found him at 3 in the morning, standing over Theo's crib and watching their son sleep with an expression that broke her heart. Talk to me, she said softly, coming to stand beside him. I'm terrified that I'm going to fail him. The admission came out raw, that despite everything I've done, everything I've sacrificed, I'm still going to end up being the father who wasn't there, who couldn't protect him, who destroyed his life before it really began. You won't. She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. Look at him, Lucien. Really look at him. He's healthy and safe and loved. That's because of choices you made, sacrifices you were willing to make. You gave up everything you'd built to give him a chance at a better life. That's not failure. That's the opposite of failure. What if it's not enough? It's enough. She turned to face him fully, making him meet her eyes. You're enough, not because of what you can provide or protect or prevent. You're enough because you're his father and you love him and you show up every day trying to be better than you were. That's all any child needs. He pulled her into his arms, careful not to wake Theo, and they stood there in the darkness of their son's nursery, holding each other against the fear of what tomorrow might bring. The testimony lasted 6 hours. Nora stayed home with Theo, pacing the apartment and checking her phone compulsively for updates. Michael had driven Lucien to the courthouse and promised to call the moment it was over, but the waiting felt interminable. She fed Theo, changed Theo, tried to nap when Theo napped, and failed completely at anything resembling calm. When Lucien finally walked through the door at 4:30, she knew immediately from his expression that it had gone well. It's done, he said, and the relief in his voice made her knees weak. It's really done. The prosecutors are satisfied, the defense attorneys couldn't shake my testimony, and the judge seemed convinced. My lawyer thinks I'm clear, completely, totally clear. Nora launched herself at him. Theo nestled between them as they embraced. It's over? Really over? really over. He was laughing and crying at the same time, all the tension of the past months finally releasing. I'm free, Nora. Free to be just a father, just a man trying to build a normal life with the woman he loves and the son who changed everything. That night they celebrated quietly, takeout from an Italian restaurant that delivered sparkling cider since Nora was still nursing, and Theo sleeping peacefully in his swing while his parents toasted to new beginnings. It wasn't glamorous or dramatic, but it was theirs, real and hard-won and precious beyond measure. What do we do now? Nora asked, leaning against Lucien's shoulder while they watched their son sleep. Now we live. He pressed a kiss to her temple. We find a real apartment, something bigger with a yard maybe. We make friends with other parents at the pediatrician's office. We worry about normal things like preschool applications and whether Theo is meeting his developmental milestones. That sounds almost boring. After everything we've been through, boring sounds perfect. 3 months later, they moved into a brownstone in Jamaica Plain with a small yard and a neighborhood full of young families. Nora painted Theo's new room a soft blue, and Lucien assembled more furniture with slightly more success than the crib had been. They joined a new parents group at the local library, and Nora made friends with other mothers who had no idea about Lucien's past. Lucien started a legitimate real estate development company, using the business skills he'd honed in criminal enterprise to build something legal and profitable. It wasn't as exciting as running an empire, he admitted, but it paid well and didn't require looking over his shoulder constantly. And most importantly, it meant he could be home for dinner every night, could help with bedtime, could be present for all the ordinary moments of Theo's early life. The trials concluded in March, resulting in dozens of convictions and prison sentences that would keep Lucien's former associates locked up for decades. His name appeared in the news a few times as a witness, but the media quickly moved on to other stories. Within 6 months, Lucien Moretti was yesterday's news, just another criminal who'd cooperated with prosecutors to save himself. The reality was so much more complicated and so much simpler. He'd saved himself, yes, but he'd also saved his family. And in doing so, he'd become someone neither of them had thought possible. A good man, a loving father, a partner who showed up every day trying to be better than the day before. On Theo's first birthday, they threw a party in their backyard with decorations and a smash cake and more toy cars than any 1-year-old needed. Neighbors came with their children, and Nora watched Lucien navigate small talk and toddler chaos with the same intensity he'd once brought to criminal negotiations. He was still learning, still figuring out how to be this version of himself, but he was doing it every day. He was doing it. That night, after Theo was asleep and the decorations were put away and the house was quiet again, Lucien found Nora in their bedroom. I have something for you, he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Nora's breath caught. Lucien, it's not what you think. Not yet, anyway. He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny footprint. It's Theo's footprint from the hospital. I had it made into a charm so you could carry a piece of him with you always. Tears stung her eyes as he fastened it around her wrist. It's beautiful. You're beautiful. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears. You gave me a second chance I didn't deserve, Nora. You gave me a son who made me want to be better than I was. You gave me a reason to tear down everything I'd built and build something new in its place. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that gift. You already are. She kissed him softly. You're exactly who Theo needs you to be. Who I need you to be. Then marry me. The words came out urgent, desperate. Not because it's expected or because it makes things easier legally. Marry me because I love you, because I want to spend the rest of my life being Theo's father and your husband and the man who gets to wake up beside you every morning. She'd known this was coming eventually, had seen it in the way he looked at her, in the growing stability of their life together. But hearing him ask, hearing the vulnerability and hope in his voice, made her heart stutter. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. They married in June in a small ceremony at the courthouse, with Theo as their only witness and Michael standing up as best man. Nora wore a simple white dress and carried wildflowers from the farmer's market. Lucien wore a suit and looked at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. And when the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Theo clapped his chubby hands together and squealed with delight, making everyone laugh. It wasn't the wedding she'd imagined as a little girl, but it was perfect in its simplicity. Just two people who'd found each other in the darkness and fought their way to the light, promising to keep choosing each other every day for the rest of their lives. The years that followed were beautifully, wonderfully ordinary. Theo grew from a baby to a toddler to a bright, curious preschooler who asked endless questions and loved trucks with a passion that amused his parents. Lucienne's business thrived, and Nora eventually went back to work part-time at a bookstore that reminded her of Margaret's shop in Providence. They bought bicycles and went to the zoo and had family movie nights with more popcorn than any three people needed. There were hard moments, too. Sleepless nights when Theo was sick, arguments about parenting choices, moments when the past threatened to intrude on the present. But they faced everything together, the way they'd promised they would. And slowly, steadily, they built a life that had nothing to do with criminal empires or federal testimony or the darkness that had once defined Lucienne's existence. On Theo's 5th birthday, Nora found Lucien in their son's room long after bedtime, watching him sleep the way he used to in the safe house apartment. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, sliding her arms around his waist. "How different everything is now. How 5 years ago, I was testifying against people I'd known for decades, terrified that I'd end up dead or in prison, and now I'm just..." He gestured around the cheerful bedroom with its dinosaur posters and overflowing toy box. "I'm just a dad worried about whether my son is ready for kindergarten." "You're not just anything." She pressed a kiss between his shoulder blades. "You're an amazing father, a wonderful husband, and proof that people really can change if they want it badly enough." "I wanted it for him." Lucien turned in her arms, pulling her close. "Everything I did, every sacrifice I made, it was for him. So he could grow up without the weight of my past crushing him. So he could be whoever he wants to be instead of being defined by who his father used to be." "He'll know someday," Nora said quietly. "When he's old enough to understand, we'll tell him the truth about where you came from and what you had to do to get here." "I know, and I'll answer whatever questions he has, honestly and completely. But I want him to know that the past doesn't have to determine the future. That we can choose differently, be better, build something good even out of terrible circumstances." Theo stirred in his sleep, mumbling something about dinosaurs before settling again. They stood together watching him, this miracle of a child who'd changed everything, who'd given them both a reason to fight for a future neither of them had believed was possible. "I love you," Lucien whispered into the darkness. "I love you too." Nora tightened her arms around him. "All three of us. We made it. Against impossible odds, through danger and fear and every reason to fail, we made it to the other side." "We did." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "And we're going to keep making it, every day for the rest of our lives." Years later, when Theo was old enough to ask questions about his father's past, Lucien told him the truth about the empire he'd built, the violence he'd committed, the darkness he'd lived in before Theo was born. He didn't soften it or make excuses, just laid out the facts and let his son process them. Theo listened carefully, his young face serious, and when Lucien finished talking, he was quiet for a long moment. "But you changed," Theo said finally. "You left all that behind before I was born." "I did." Lucien met his son's eyes, so like Nora's, with absolute honesty. "I changed because I wanted to be the kind of father you deserved, the kind of man your mother could build a life with, the kind of person who didn't solve problems with violence or fear." "Are you still changing?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, is changing something you do once, or is it something you keep doing every day?" Theo tilted his head, curious. "Because you always say we should try to be better than we were yesterday. Is that what you're doing? Being better than you were when you were a bad guy?" Lucien looked at his son, this wise, thoughtful 8-year-old who somehow understood more than most adults and felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's exactly what I'm doing. Every single day, I try to be better than I was, better than the man I used to be, better than the father I was yesterday, because you deserve that, and your mom deserves that, and I deserve to be proud of who I'm becoming instead of ashamed of who I was." Theo considered this, then nodded seriously. "Okay. That's good then." He paused. "Can we still get ice cream? You promised." And just like that, the heavy conversation was over, replaced by the ordinary concerns of childhood. Lucien laughed, ruffled his son's dark hair, and took him for ice cream the way he'd promised. Because this was his life now, not dramatic confrontations or criminal enterprises, just the beautiful mundane reality of being a father, a husband, a man who'd chosen to be better and kept choosing it every day. It wasn't perfect, wasn't always easy, but it was real and hard-won and more valuable than any empire he'd ever built. That night, lying in bed with Nora curled against his side, Lucien thought about how far they'd come. From a clinic in Providence where his world had shattered and reformed through danger and fear and impossible choices, to this quiet bedroom in Jamaica Plain where their son slept safely down the hall and their future stretched out bright and promising. "What are you thinking about?" Nora murmured sleepily. "How lucky I am." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "How impossibly, inexplicably lucky I am that you gave me a second chance." "We gave each other second chances." She tilted her face up to his. "You're not the only one who had to change, Lucien. I had to learn to trust again, to believe that love was worth the risk, to choose hope over fear." "And did you? Choose hope over fear? Every day?" She smiled in the darkness. "Every single day, I look at you and Theo and this life we've built, and I choose to believe in second chances, in redemption, in the possibility that people really can change if they love something enough." He held her closer, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. Outside, the city hummed with life, ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware of the small miracle happening in this brownstone in Jamaica Plain. The miracle of a man who'd been a monster learning to be human. The miracle of a woman brave enough to give him that chance. The miracle of a child who'd saved them both without even knowing it. This was the future they'd fought for. This quiet, ordinary, impossibly precious future where the biggest crisis was whether Theo would eat his vegetables, and the most important decision was what book to read at bedtime. Where violence was something from the distant past instead of a constant threat, and love was the foundation instead of a dangerous complication. Lucien Moretti had built his empire on fear and blood and power, but he'd built his family on sacrifice and change, and the desperate determination to be better than he was. And lying there in the darkness with his wife in his arms and his son sleeping safely down the hall, he knew with absolute certainty which legacy mattered more. The empire was dust and memory now, relevant only as a cautionary tale about the man he used to be. But the family, the beautiful, ordinary, miraculous family, that was forever. That was real. That was worth every sacrifice, every terrifying choice, every moment of doubt and fear. That was everything. And Lucien Moretti, former crime boss, current real estate developer, full-time father and husband, knew he would spend the rest of his life protecting it, nurturing it, and proving himself worthy of the second chance that had saved his soul.